In 2015, I was living with my then boyfriend. I was 18 at the time, living in a very sketchy apartment building in a not so good neighborhood. When I say sketchy, I mean crack house type sketchy. You'd find anything from alcoholics, severely mentally ill people to drug dealers and addicts living in these apartments, and the police were called to the property a few times a week. They even drove by just to check for safety reasons. There was an incident once during the night. One of the neighbors knocked on a door and my boyfriend went to open it up while I was asleep. One of the neighbors, an addict who happened to be severely schizophrenic, was at the door, and he barged into the apartment and threatened my boyfriend. Fortunately, he managed to calm him down and got him out of the apartment. For reasons like this, we brought a live security camera that we installed at our door and also connected to our TV so that we could easily check who was there. Everything was fine for a few weeks, until this one night. My boyfriend's best friend was sleeping over this weekend. We were all sleeping. I guess it was around 3 to 4 a.m. at the time when I woke up to someone ringing the doorbell. The camera was connected to the TV, but there was also a small screen attached to the door that I could activate to see who was outside. Since everyone was sleeping in the living room, I walked into the hallway to check on the small screen instead of turning on the TV. When I pressed the button, I saw two guys wearing hoodies looking at the camera. I paused for a second because I didn't fully understand what was going on. Not until they looked at each other, nodded, and then one of the guys reached his hand towards the camera and ripped it out, making the screen go black. I stood there for about 5 seconds before I realized what had happened. I ran back to the living room and shook my boyfriend awake, almost yelling, while also whispering, "Quick, get up! Someone just stole your camera!" He darted up and ran outside, didn't even bother putting on a shirt or shoes. All the noise woke up his buddy. Naturally, according to him, later on, he saw a guy running away into a wooded area, so he chased after him. What he didn't know was that I saw two guys and not just one. Well, I think the guy who ran away was just the distraction, because about a minute after he ran out, I heard someone entering the hallway. I froze in absolute terror. My buddy noticed that and sprinted to the door, separating the hallway of the living room, and the conversation went something along the lines of, "Oh, is Jason here? No, he isn't. Oh, could I come inside and sit for a minute? I don't think that would be appropriate since he isn't here. Oh, but I could go in and wait for him until he gets back. That's a no. Please leave. Just for a minute? No, leave." He left. Buddy came in with a shocked but also frightened expression on his face. Both of us were in awe about what happened. My boyfriend came back 5 minutes later and told us about the unsuccessful chase. Both me and my buddy were terrified as he started telling us what happened while he was outside. My boyfriend said he only saw one guy outside when he had the time to process the situation. My theories were A, they stole their camera as a distraction so my boyfriend would chase him while guy number 2 raided the apartment while he was out, or B, they knew I was there but the buddy was not, and they stole the camera to lure him out so the others would walk in and either rob the place, assault me, or both. Both of these options are likely, the first one more than the other. The reason I also suspect the second theory is because most of the neighbors knew that I lived there with him. Many of them had seen me leaving and entering the apartment, and many of them occasionally said hi to me in passing, so most of the neighbors knew about me as well. I'm only 5 foot, quite small and an easy target. Fortunately, I'll never know what could have happened that night. I don't know how that night would have gone down if my boyfriend's best friend hadn't been there. If I wasn't a target to begin with, I definitely would have been one if that guy walked in and saw me alone. I think whatever guardian angel placed Buddy there that night. Everyone I've told this story to told me that I'm being paranoid, and probably wouldn't have gotten hurt, but I don't believe them. They weren't in that situation. Nobody plans for a break-in without malicious intent to begin with, so I don't doubt for a second that I wouldn't have been caught in the middle of it had we been alone. I babysat for a single mum down the road. She was going out with her new boyfriend. Cute, great 5-year-old boy, very timid though, and I myself was 15 at the time. Night's going fine, and we decide to do some arts and crafts. He gets up and runs over to grab some scissors and runs back, and I say, "Hold up, slow down. You shouldn't run with those, it's bad and dangerous." He instantly drops the scissors and starts sobbing, turns around, and defeatedly heads towards the kitchen. I'm completely baffled and follow him to the kitchen, and say I'm confused and ask what's going on. He points to a drawer, and through sobs over 20 seconds he manages to struggle out, "It's a silverware drawer," but prominent on the top is a large knife, which I can see has specks of blood on it. I turn around to him, and he's taken his pants off. On his legs, I see countless cuts, some scars looking years old, some only a day or two old. So I'm in a weird mix of confusion, pity, fear, and sadness. He had been cut as a punishment for any little thing he ever did wrong. I close the drawer, kneel down and tell him I'm sorry, and I would never hurt him, and to put his pants back on. It takes me maybe 20 minutes for me to console him to stop crying and calm down, and believe that I'm not going to harm him, and this isn't a test. I get some treats for us, let him choose a TV show, and sit him down on the couch. I say I need to make a quick call, but I'll be right around the corner and back ASAP. He agrees, and I call the cops. Non-emergency though, so it'll be a while. I let them know he's still very shaky and I'd like to hang up and just go be with him. I hang up, but before I do I decide to deadbolt all the doors just in case. Luckily for me, too, because the mum gets home before the cops, I give the kid my Discman and headphones and send him upstairs so he can't hear any of the ensuing unpleasantries. I go to the door and tell her she's not getting in until the cops arrive. She freaks out, screaming at me and pounding on the door, yelling to be let in, ordering the kid to let her in or it'll happen. She goes around the door and tries them as well. Just as she grabs a brick and approaches the window, the cops pull in. She drops the brick and goes to them in hysterics, claiming I've threatened to hurt her boy and I'm doing terrible things. I open the door and approach. The cops yell at me to stay where I am, and one of them runs up to me and grabs hold. I do not resist and explain the situation. Halfway through, Mummy screams at me, "Liar! You did it! You monster! You hurt my boy!" The other cop manages to stop her screaming at me, and I convince my cop to step further away so that I can finish. Cops converse and tell me I'm going to be cuffed and put in the cruiser until medical services get there to inspect the child. I successfully argue that mum and son should not be alone together. The mum is belligerent. "You have the culprit all cuffed. You can go and throw the book at that monster while you're still here the entire wait." Medical gets there, inspects the boy, and I'm released with apologies, and the mom takes my place in the cruiser. All that, and I didn't even get paid. I saw her packing to move a few weeks later, so I guess she didn't get charged. Never saw the kid again, but I hope he was able to go to a better person, maybe other family members or his dad. The dad always seemed like a great guy, but he hadn't been around for a few years since shortly after the breakup. Looking back, I have to wonder if she might have framed him for her abuse to get custody. I didn't get much follow-up because in early teens, no one wants to share any grisly details with me, and to be fair, I probably wouldn't have wanted them. About 2 years ago, I moved from my college town in Arizona to Woodland Hills, California for my new job. I was 21 and living alone in a studio within 2 blocks of an outdoor mall and gym. The apartments were older, built in the mid-70s, but were well maintained with a fencing cameras around the entire complex and gated entrances. It was a fairly nice area, mostly young professionals and families, and it felt pretty safe. After this incident, I didn't leave my apartment complex alone after dark. One night I decided to take a walk after my workout. It was barely nightfall, and still fairly warm. I grabbed my water bottle and started walking past the gym in the opposite direction of my apartment. I walked for a little while, turned around and started walking home. That's when I noticed a white Escalade with completely blacked out windows that had passed me previously, passed me again. They drove down to the light and made the turn, so I thought nothing of it. Only when I saw the car for the 3rd time did I start to panic. By this point it was well past dark, and most people were heading home from the gym and the outdoor mall. I was still a few blocks from the gym and the car kept driving past, slowing down and speeding back up if they saw anyone around. I cut through a parking lot to try to get to the closest store open, a McDonald's. Before I knew it, the Escalade was back, and in the parking lot, between me and the McDonald's, the car started slowly circling the parking lot, and the windows rolled down part way to reveal 3 men in their 30s to 40s just staring at me. At that point I was frozen, and decided to stand under a light by a closed store while frantically trying to call my friends from the apartment complex to come get me. My mum, friends from other states, anyone so that I wasn't alone. The Escalade kept circling, slowing down to barely an idle every time they'd pass me. I saw the door of McDonald's open, and a younger guy came out, clearly done with his shift, and headed to his car. I started yelling for him to wait and that I needed his help, and took off running towards him. The Escalade sped out the parking lot back to the nearest light and turned again. I apologized to the younger guy for scaring him, and asked if he could please walk me to the gym, thinking the men were probably gone and I could wait a few minutes there before walking back to my apartment. We made it to the gym, and he made sure I felt safe there before going back to his car. I waited for 10 minutes, still trying to reach my friend who lived in the complex, so he could come get me. I wasn't able to get a reply, so I called one of my girlfriends from back home and spoke to her as I did the walk the rest of the way home. I got past the main intersection before the car turned down my road and started following me again. My heart sank, and I had a horrible feeling that if I didn't get inside the gate before they got to me, I'd never be seen again. I broke into a sprint and screamed into my phone that I'm being followed and for my friend to not hang up. The gate had just started to close behind another resident's car and I barreled through it, sprinting the way back to my apartment and locking the door. After about 3 hours, I went to take my dog to go potty before bed, and out of curiosity or sheer stupidity, I walked back towards the gates I came through, still safe within the fence, and I saw the Escalade parked on the other side of the road, waiting just outside the camera's field of view. I calmly turned and walked my dog onto the interior apartment complex out of their sight. They came back to the same spot every night for several days, and after that, I never saw them again. I live with 3 other guys in a duplex. What happened was around Christmas time, and our living community consists of a mix of college kids and families. One evening, my girlfriend and I arrived at the vacant house around 8 p.m. All the lights were off, which was normal, and upon entering we smelled the welcoming scent of freshly baked cookies. Turning on the kitchen light, we felt the heat of the oven radiate through the chilly home, and oddly enough, there were no cookies. There were a couple of Tupperware containers pulled out from the cabinet, but no cookies in them. Slightly stranger, 8x8 brownie containers were found in the sink, and there was a spatula covered in cookie dough, chocolate chip to be precise. Who bakes cookies in those square containers? One by one, my roommate came back to the house. Will, Jack, Brian. Jack claims to not have baked any cookies, as well as Will. Brian is known to bake all the time, so we waited for him to return. Lo and behold, he comes back and swears he hadn't baked anything. We all looked at each other in confusion and dismay. Who would come into a college kid's house and do such a thing? And might I add, no belongings were stolen. Our 51-inch TV was still there along with all the gaming consoles and music equipment, clothes and laptop. Upon further investigation, we concluded the house was completely empty for a total of roughly 4 hours, and there was in fact cookie residue on both the spatula and the Tupperware. The trash cans inside and outside the house had no evidence of any cookie business going down. Whatever happened to me and my roommates is truly incredibly unexplainable. This happened 24 years ago, and isn't a story I share often. My friend Mike and I are at a bar one night with a friend of ours. We're there with our friend Art, an older guy, and we've known him for a few years from hanging out in clubs. We're in our early 20s, and Art is in his mid-30s or so. But hey, we're all having fun and trying to pick up chicks, so age isn't an issue with us. The night comes to a close, and Art asks us if we want to go to a party with him in Westchester. It's about a 30 to 40 minute drive from where we are, but in the opposite direction of home. There's no guarantee of how big or fun this party would be, so we politely declined and headed to the after-hours spot near our house. Fast forward a few days, we read about a girl going missing out in Westchester. We joke and say, thank God we weren't out there, and let the news pass. Fast forward another 2 years, an arrest is made concerning the missing girl. The girl, Amy Willard. Her life was taken from her, and her body was discovered a few days after she went missing. This story made every headline in the area, and I believe got some national attention. In fact, the show Forensic Files did an episode about it. The murderer? Arthur Bowmar. The same Art that Mike and I were hanging with the night her life was ended. Had we gone with him to Westchester, it is possible that we either would be in jail with him, or worse. I wouldn't be here sharing this experience if that were the case. See, Art ended the life of a man in Nevada and served 11 years for it. When paroled in 1990, he moved out to PA, and he was arrested for breaking and entering in 1998. And when apprehended, he was driving the car of a woman named Maria Cabuenos, whose remains were found in March of 1988, and her life and how it ended remains an unsolved mystery, and still is to this day. They linked his DNA to the Willard case and conviction. He still sits on death row to this day, I believe. "30 years ago, I'm 14, and me and an older friend are babysitting for a 6-year-old girl and her younger brother. We've been told that sometimes the girl complains about seeing a ghost man in her bedroom and upstairs at night, and that he comes out through the attic door. Now, I didn't believe a word of it. Kids are weird and they say weird things. We get the kids ready for bed, but they wouldn't settle. This girl said she felt scared, and her little brother started crying. She asked if she could sleep in her mum's bed until she got home. The little brother wanted to go with her, so I tucked them in and told some silly stories and laughed till they were both tired. Both kids were virtually asleep when we left the door ajar and the hall light on. An hour later, we were sitting downstairs watching The Equalizer, and all was good. The kids were definitely asleep, as I had to sneak past their room to use the bathroom. I had a quick peek on my way back. The little brother was snoring gently, But other than that, everything else was quiet. Back downstairs to watch a bit more TV. 20 minutes go by and out of nowhere we hear heavy banging. Very heavy. The kids are screaming immediately, and I run upstairs to meet the kids as they're running out of their rooms. The banging continues. I have eyes on the kids, so I know it's not them making the noise. The kids fly at me. I grab the little brother and we rush down the stairs, run into the front room, shut the door and all crash on the sofa. Everything is silent apart from the TV, which I switch off. We sat in silence for about 5 minutes holding each other, and after a few minutes the girl, with tears in her eyes, just says in a matter of fact, the man was angry because she wasn't in her own room. So we tried to push over a wardrobe, then he started thumping the wall. That event has stayed with me all these years. It started when I went on vacation for a few days about a year ago in November. I came back, and the back door that leads into the stairs to the basement was unlocked. I had a roommate called Alex, who didn't come very often because she practically lived with her girlfriend, and I assumed that she had just forgotten to lock the door. We mostly use this door because it's closer to the side of the house that we park on. I let the dogs outside and then make sure to lock the door and go to bed. 3 a.m. hits, and the dogs wake up and start pacing like they're nervous and are acting weird. I calm them down and go back to sleep. Then they go insane at around 4, and I decide to let them out. I go to the back door, and the door is slightly open. I freak out and call Alex. She's let friends crash in the basement before, but she usually says something, and says that she hasn't had anyone over. I decide at this point it's probably best to have a weapon for protection. I check out the basement, grab a bat as well, and make sure one of the dogs comes with me. I turn on the lights and notice that there's a blanket that we keep on the back of a couch laying on the floor, and the throw pillows are both on one end and have an indenting where it looks like someone had been laying. I hear the laundry room, and I see the washer and dryer have both been used. There were clothes that were in the dryer now on top of it, and the laundry detergent bottle was also open. As I'm heading back upstairs, I notice that the spare keys that we kept by the back door are gone. I call Alex to tell her what I found, and she decides to come over. She checks out her stuff and finds nothing missing, so she opts to just change the locks, as she owns the house, so she can do this. A week or so passes, and as I'm waking up to what sounds like creaking coming from the attic, I think nothing of it, and just get up and start my night, as I'm a night shift worker. As I'm leaving, I happen to notice that the cover on the whole of the attic looked a bit crooked. I freaked out. I messaged Alex and told her what happened, and she says she will look into it when she gets back from work herself. While I'm at work, I get a text from Alex letting me know she didn't find anything off, and I'm probably still just paranoid from the other night. She says that since the locks were all changed, there's no way someone could have gotten in without breaking something. I ended up moving out after a year. She was having her girlfriend move in with her, and I was tired of being in that house. It became a regular thing that the door would be unlocked, and I always heard sounds coming from up above. I would occasionally notice that the cover to the attic had been moved as well. I also regularly found things would move around in the basement, and I never went down there without a dog with me. It took a few months in the new place to be able to sleep soundly again. I never heard anything from Alex since. However, I was asked to come over to let the dogs out while she was out of town one time, and the door was unlocked when I got there. She texted me that day complaining that I didn't know how to lock the door, and I told her that I locked it, but she insisted that I was pranking her. That's all I know. This happened back in the 90s, when I was still in primary school, so I really had no clue how much danger I was in. I would have been around 11, living in a regional city of Australia. For the last year I had been having a lot of trouble at school, getting bullied a bit by classmates and felt really singled out by my teacher. My mom worked around the corner from my school, so when everything would get too much at school, I would literally just walk out of class, down the road and onto her work site. It would take me about half an hour to walk there along a main road. A few times I noticed a small white car drive past me slowly, but I only noticed this because I would see the same car go up and down the street as I was walking and while I was sitting outside of my mum's work site. After a while I started seeing the same car driving up my street at home and parked along the streets that my brother and I would ride our bikes around in. I didn't usually see the same cars and people. It was just like, oh, there goes that car again. My family followed a serious routine. Mondays, swimming and tutoring. Tuesdays, netball training. Wednesday, netball game. Thursday, basketball training. Fridays, we would go and see professional basketball or football, depending on the season. Saturday was my brother's basketball games, and Sunday were our days to go to the rivers with friends or swims or barbecue lunch. It never changed unless someone was sick. So one Friday night I'm dressed and ready to go watch the basketball game, but I can't find my shoes. I'm pretty sure that they're in the car, which is in a garage under our 2-story house. To get it, I have to walk down the outside steps at the front of our house, which has a full view of the road. I walk out the front door. At the end of our driveway, I notice a small white car. Now I've never taken that much notice of the white cars up until this point. And it wasn't uncommon for cars to park in this exact spot for our neighbor. But I just got a sinking feeling in my stomach when I looked at it. I kept walking down the stairs, and as I got close to the bottom, the driver's side door opens, and a man gets out quickly. I keep walking towards the garage, and he starts moving towards our driveway. That was the point when something inside me told me to scream for my parents and run and lock myself in the car. I did exactly that, and this guy who was halfway up my driveway at this point turned around and ran back to his car and drove off. By the time my parents came out, there was no evidence that this had happened, and they didn't believe me. A week later, there was a notice in our school newsletter about a man in a white car attempting to take another child from my school at the same night. My parents were very shaken and took me seriously after reading that. I don't believe he was ever caught, but it definitely taught me to listen to my intuition and take notice of my surroundings. Once when I was really young, like one of my earliest memories, me and my 2 older brothers and my older sister were home alone while my parents were out. This is Baltimore City, and late at night, and suddenly there's a knock on the door. We ignore it, like we're supposed to. Then it's a banging, and a man's voice yells, "I know you're in there, let me in." We freak out, my sister grabs a knife, and yells for him to go away. "I'm your Uncle John, let me in." "We don't have an Uncle John. I'm your dad's brother." "My dad doesn't have a brother?" He doesn't know about me, let me in." By this time we've called the cops and are huddled under a table, sister with knife in hand. Cops show up and arrest him on sight. Parents come home freaking out, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is how we learned about my dad's long-lost brother who lives in Virginia. The only way I can think this dude didn't know that this was creepy as hell was that he was from the country and maybe didn't think showing up unannounced to meet lost kin was weird, but to some kids from Baltimore, We're terrified. This happened to me in 2016, but I was having trouble sleeping tonight, and my brain dredged this up from my memories. I had recently moved back to my college town so I could rent an apartment with a friend after a long-term relationship ended. I was doing a lot of job hunting for pretty much anything, as I was pretty desperate for income and unsuccessful with finding work within my career field. I was using multiple job sites, but mostly Indeed because I liked their website feature that helps you track which jobs you've applied for and their status. There were of course some jobs that I applied for on their own website, but I kept track. After a few weeks of searching, I get a call. I don't recognize the number, and the area code wasn't familiar, but I pick it up as it might be a job prospect. A woman is on the other end, and she says that she's calling to set up an interview, as I had applied for their company. The company's name was not something that I remembered applying for. While on the phone with her, I quickly pulled up Indeed on my laptop and looked through all the jobs I had applied for. None matched. I have no idea what this job is, but don't make this apparent on the phone, as I've been job searching for weeks and am still unemployed. I ask her for the address of the building and write it down. Looking back, I can't remember the name she gave me, but what I do remember was how pushy she was into scheduling the interview for later that evening. I agree to do the interview and thank her, but as I hang up, I get a very bad feeling. Something doesn't seem right. So I Google the phone number and it's not linked to a company. I Google the address and it's also not affiliated with a company. It's from way outside the distance of jobs that I was applying for, almost an hour away from where I live, and I pull up a Google Street View and I can see that the address she gave me is several small run-down buildings with a highway exit in the distance. It looked desolate. I pictured driving myself there around dusk when she scheduled the interview for, and I could physically feel this sensation of dread settling within me. I didn't want to go. I brought all of this up to my roomie, and he said that I might be overthinking it, but if I wasn't comfortable with it, to just not go. I'm so glad I didn't. The more time passes, the more I am aware of just how shady it was. In hindsight, I wish that I had gone to the police, but I didn't at the time, because the year prior I hadn't had much faith in them, as I tried to get a restraining order before an ex tried harming me, but it never worked out. Who knows what would have happened if I'd have gone? It's certainly a scary thought. I'm a nanny for 2 young boys, both are 14 months old. I've been working with them for less than a month, but creepy things keep happening. When I'm playing with them downstairs, I often hear distinct footsteps coming from the upstairs, despite nobody being in the house besides us. I also constantly feel like things move by themselves, when they are clearly just out of reach from the boys. I've brushed it off as my imagination until just now. It's nap time and I've been hearing the footsteps again, but have been ignoring them because I can't figure out if it's just the sounds of the house or not. But then, from down the hall, I hear a large ball bouncing. It sounds like the exercise ball that's in the room of one of the boys. I immediately went over to the video camera and looked at it, and it shows him very clearly asleep, but I can't see the ball from where the camera is. I immediately ran over to the room and peeked in. The ball was rolling around a tiny bit with no clear reason as to how. All the windows were closed, and the ball is on the ground. It could have only made that sound if a grown adult picked it up and dropped it. I could maybe attribute the rolling to wind that perhaps somehow moved it as I opened the door. The ball sound. What? Am I crazy? We live in a court in an upscale neighborhood, in a large city in the US. Our court faces the expressway, and directly across from our house is a PG&E campus that has a pretty good open field that you can cut through to reach the streets and exit the neighborhood and get back onto the expressway. My parents were out at a concert and my sister was at home, and it was about 7:30 p.m. when I decided to head to my boyfriend's house, who lives 5 minutes away. Now, before I left, I had this weird nagging feeling that I need to leave our living room light on, as well as the porch lights. This is important for later. So I left them on, got in my car and drove to my boyfriend's house. An hour later I get a notification on my phone that the Ring camera that is positioned at our front porch went off. I immediately knew something was wrong, because I knew no one was supposed to be home for a while. So I opened up the app and didn't see anything, and I'm waiting for the video to populate and see a guy in a black hoodie walk up to our porch, knock on the door, then moving away from the porch into the dark. Now, the way our camera is positioned makes it difficult to see his face, but my dad was adamant the guy had a mask on. About a minute after that I get notified again, and it shows the guy walking back up to the door, knocking a bit louder, then moving away from the porch again. At this point, I knew it wasn't a prank, so I let off the siren through the app, hoping it would deter him. But when I didn't see him in the camera, I knew he had gone through the backyard, so I called the cops. The way the dispatcher was talking to me, it almost seemed like she thought it was a false alarm, but I was insistent that someone was trying to break in. She asked me to drive back to my house, and once I get there to call them back. I feel like unless I called them back, they had no intentions of sending a cop to check on things. My boyfriend and I drive up to my house and don't pull up in the driveway, but park across from my house and turn off my car lights. I had left my sister's window blinds open, thank God, and kept looking at the window from my car, as I knew that it was the only way to see into the house, and dialed the cops again. 30 seconds into the call, I noticed flashlights through the window, and I tell the dispatcher. I initially thought it could have been a car driving from the other side of the house, but that thought was shot within 10 seconds when I saw the silhouette of a man looking through the window. The moment I saw the silhouette, I yelled into the phone, "Someone's in my house, please hurry." The dispatcher told us to drive out of the court and park a bit away for safety while we wait for the cops. About a minute or two of us sitting in the car and checking behind us, my boyfriend yelled, "I see him walking ahead." And we see a guy in a black hoodie, holding a bag, fast walking down the street to our right and hiding behind the shadows of a corner house. We later put two and two together, and we think he left my house, cut through the PG&E grassy area, and tried to escape down the street, not knowing my car was parked there. I saw him and shined my high beams on him, so he knew I saw him, and at that point he began running towards a parked SUV that was parked in front of us the entire time. He got in the car and immediately turned it on and started driving. At that point adrenaline kicked in for me, and I floored it while trying to catch up with him, while the dispatcher and my boyfriend are telling me to stop driving and park because it isn't safe to chase after him. 10 seconds after we park and the SUV is turning right, I see a cop behind us and immediately rolled down my window and gestured to the cop that that's the guy that's driving ahead of us, and he floored it to catch up with him. The cop came back and told me that he missed him and didn't see in which direction the guy fled, but drove back to my house and were met by 5 more cops and a K9 unit, and a helicopter hovering over the whole valley in search for him. Turns out the guy broke through my parents' window and focused his attention on their room and stole thousands of dollars worth of jewelry, including my parents' wedding jewelry, as well as my grandparents' and aunt's jewelry. My aunt passed away from cancer over 10 years ago. When he reached mine and my sister's room is when I had pulled up to the house because he's rummaging through a bit of our stuff, but absolutely nothing was stolen from our rooms. The cops believed that I bought myself time to get to the house by leaving the lights on, because he took extra time to ensure no one was home, and that gave me time to pull up to my house and deter him before he stole more. They still haven't caught the guy, but I guess a house down the street from ours was broken into hours before ours was. Maybe 10 minutes away from ours. The cops believed the guy tried to blend into the neighborhood for that extra hour, so he bought himself time for the cops to stop searching so that he could move on. There were numerous reports of suspicious SUVs parked with its lights off in other surrounding neighborhoods just sitting there, which is why the cops believed he was trying to blend in and buy time. To the person who broke into our home and stole my parents' priceless jewelry and made us now live in fear, let's not meet again. As a kid growing up, I lived in a pretty secluded neighborhood where my bus would drop me off from school. I had to walk through a small wooded area and a good distance down the road to get home. The houses were not close together and nobody was ever outside or anything. That led to some less than pleasant encounters with strange drivers. I remember a black car with tinted windows would occasionally visit while I was outside. They would speed at me and seemingly try to hit me, turn around, and do it again. I had to hop a neighbor's fence twice to avoid being struck, as they would even come up on the grass and skim the fence. I was too young to have any friends that drove at the time, so it wasn't one of them playing a messed up prank. I don't know why they did this, but I remember them coming down my street a few times as a kid, whenever I was in a yard and not on the street. They would just drive at cruel pace past me. Another time I was in middle school walking home. I did dress nice that day, but in my opinion, I definitely still looked like a child. A man in a faded red truck slowed and paced behind me. He rolled down his window and asked, "Hey, are you broke down anywhere? You need a ride?" I politely declined, saying I didn't drive. "Are you sure?" I don't know why, but him asking if I was sure gave me a chill. I politely reaffirmed that I was in middle school and couldn't drive, which was probably a stupid thing to say. Kids are dumb. He still slowly paced me. Though we were both silent, it was probably only about 10 seconds, but every passing moment was increasingly heavy. I was right about to bolt when he drove off to the end of the street. I ran the rest of the way home, went inside, and from my kitchen window, watched that same truck slowly drive down my street twice more. I told myself maybe he was just an awkward guy who was bad at picking up women. But why did he come down my street again twice after I got home? Why did he continue to pace me, trying to pick up a woman who clearly looked like a school kid? Maybe he was debating on taking me. Maybe he really was just a strange person, though he gave a bad vibe from the start. I was more cautious walking home after this, but I never saw that guy again, thankfully. My sister and her best friend were chased by a man in a red truck when they were in elementary school, but I don't know if it was the same guy. Living in the middle of nowhere in the south, there's a ton of trucks everywhere. It was years before my encounter and the guy didn't chase me. But who knows? All I know is that there were some crazy people to go down to our neighborhood, and I wasn't the only one who experienced them. Years ago, I was planning on taking my girlfriend to Montreal for our anniversary. I mentioned it to my friend Fred, who said, "Man, you have to try this restaurant called Au Noir. It's one of those places where you eat in total darkness and all the waiters are blind." I thought it sounded neat, so we decided to go. We didn't bother to make reservations, we just picked a random day and called before we left the hotel to make sure there was room for us. The place was pretty cool. You put all your valuables in a locker, then your blind waiter leads you and your party to a conga line and a table. The place is so dark you can't see your hands in front of your face. I don't think I've ever been anywhere as dark as that. The food was decent, and it was fun experiencing eating sloppily in a crowded restaurant. My girlfriend and I made out a bit, just for the thrill of it, doing it so publicly without being noticed. In the middle of the meal, I started hearing a familiar voice out in the restaurant. It sounded exactly like Fred. I told my girlfriend, but she said I was crazy. So I shouted into the total darkness, "Hey, Fred!" The voice stopped talking, but there was no response. After a moment, I heard the voice again, so I shouted, "Hey, Fred Parker!" Out of the darkness, I heard him reply, "Did someone say my name?" My mind was blown. Even though Fred didn't know when my anniversary was, even though he picked a random day and time to have dinner, even though all three of us lived in a different city from the restaurant, we all managed to show up there for a meal at the exact same time. The funniest thing about it was that we wouldn't go over to join him because we had no idea where he was. We arranged to meet at the coffee shop across the street once we were done with our meals. Weird glitch, massive coincidence, intentional troll from Fred? Take your pick. I work in the criminal justice field, where I see a lot of crime, and I'm also naturally a follower of scary movies and stories in general. So I have to disclaim that I do have a heightened sense of paranoia, but my girlfriend and her roommate both agreed this was weird. I was out walking my girlfriend's roommate's dog, as she was working a night shift in their neighborhood, which is a very safe suburb of New York. I walked across the parking lot and to this field in the middle of a rotary, or roundabout, whatever you call them. I lived in Boston for a while, and they call them rotaries, and was screwing around on Reddit since it was near midnight and in the middle of quarantine, so there were no cars out. The dog had a long leash, so she was sniffing around, and then I saw her stop and stare toward the road. I looked up and saw a black SUV stopped in the rotary. I pulled on my COVID mask that was on my chin. Since no one was around, I had it off. And some people in New York are touchy about that, which is understandable. Just in case, they stopped to lecture me, and I didn't care to engage in argument. I looked back at my phone, and then back up, and the SUV was still there. It was a family. Mother, father in the front, and a 12-year-old daughter, or something like that, in the back seat. I was a bit startled because they were all just blankly staring directly at me. I sort of waved and nodded, and started walking the dog a bit around the grass, and they started to move slowly. They came around the rotary, and I looked back, and all of them were staring at me again. I figured they may talk to me, so I stopped and waited for them to get around the circle. But when they approached, they kept driving very slowly, all staring directly at me. I gave another half wave and they drove past me, still slowly and staring. And then back around the circle, and then again around the circle. Literally all of them blanket staring me, even with a little girl in the back seat. They did this a few more times, and I started to walk up to the edge of the circle to engage, which is normally something I would not do, but it was a family, so I felt a little bit more brave. They sped up a bit and went around the corner and turned off the rotary. I started to feel even weirder, so I decided I would walk back to her apartment building when they entered the rotary again. I was watching them from the corner of my eye, and they were still staring. I started picking up the pace, and they turned off the rotary towards me, and I picked up the pace as they followed me. Once I got to the sidewalk, I turned around because I didn't want them to know which door I was walking into. It's on a strip mall with a few other apartment buildings and stores, and they stopped about 30 feet behind me, and they were all staring out the front window. The little girl was in the center seat now, staring too. I once again raised my arm. "Can I help you?" and got no response at all. I kind of stood there and no movement, and took my phone out and typed their license plate into a note app. I was thinking this is starting to get weird. They then slowly turned on the other side of the parking lot, all still staring, until they got to the end and I rushed into the apartment building, which luckily needs a code to enter. I got up, told my girlfriend and her roomie about it in the morning, and they both freaked out a little. I watched them out the window, and they pulled back up to where I was standing on the sidewalk and just sat there in their car. I couldn't see them at this point, could only see the roof. It felt like 10 minutes before they slowly started to drive away. I can't stop thinking about their creepy-ass blank stare. Somehow it made it creepier that it was a normal-looking family with a young daughter. If it was like two younger guys, I could have marked it off as they were bored and just messing with me. But this made no sense. Last night was very unusual. My girlfriend and I got into a pretty big argument. I was exhausted from it, and I just didn't want to fight anymore for the night. She finally said to me, "I don't want to look at your face." So I said, "Fine, you don't have to." And so at about 9 o'clock I gathered up my pillows and went and laid down on the couch and fell asleep. Then I woke up at 2:30 on the dot almost. I had to use the bathroom, so I went to do that, then came back and laid down on the couch. I just got this weird feeling, and it was just too quiet in the house, so I poked my head into the bedroom to check. My girlfriend was fast asleep, and our 10-month-old son was sound asleep in his crib. I figured, what the hell, I'm over it, and slowly climbed into bed and went to sleep. Now I live in Arizona. It's been kind of rainy and cool the last few days, and to us, it's so nice that our bedroom window was open. There was a nice slow breeze coming in, and it was very relaxing. All of a sudden, I'm awoken by my son. He's crying very loudly, and was standing up in his crib, which is very unusual. Unlike most babies, he slept through the night since he was born. Sure, he makes little noises and rolls around a little, but usually finds his pacifier and dozes back off to sleep. I open my eyes to see my girlfriend has already gotten him, and she picks him up and all of a sudden stops crying. I check the time and it's 3. I'm like, maybe it's just one of those nights. So she brings him over and puts him between us. He rolls, makes noises, but doesn't want to go to sleep. So she makes him a bottle. While he's eating, I doze back off to sleep. Now I'm dreaming, but I'm still in bed, in the same position. It's dark and everything's quiet, except I can hear someone crying, weeping and moaning, like a woman grieving someone close to her has just passed. It's a long, drawn-out cry, and eerie like the breeze coming through the window. All of a sudden, my eyes jolt open, and there's sweat dripping down my forehead. I can still hear the cry, but this time I know I'm awake, so it's real. I spin around fast, and that's when I see her. She's tall, dressed in all black, like she just came from a funeral. Her face distressed, like she's been mourning for eternity. The wind came through the window behind her, and it's so strong the curtain is blowing like a flag. I see her as she reaches for my son who's lying asleep between me and my girlfriend. So I did what any father would do. I grabbed the blanket with my left hand and came down over with my arm over my son, and the blanket covering both of us so that I could hold him tight. All of a sudden, a sheer scream rings out from what I assume to be the woman, and a gust of wind hits the window hard, and then there's quiet. Nothing but my girlfriend snoring and my son's breathing, and my very heavy breath is all that can be heard, and a slight little breeze that rattles the blinds on the windows. So I lie awake for a little while and eventually fall asleep clutching my son. I woke up this morning and asked my girlfriend if she heard anything last night. Yeah, I thought I heard someone crying, but it sounded like it was coming from outside. At that point I knew it was real. Now I'm a big, burly guy with a beard, not afraid of much, and I was a tough kid growing up. But when I was a kid I was afraid of one thing. After I went to a friend's house, and his uncle told us the story of La Llorona, a Mexican folklore tale that I always believed was real. I never really wanted to stay outside after dark and never slept with my window open. Of course, I never told anyone, Because like I said, I'm tough and didn't want any of my friends to think I'm a coward. But she's real, and I'll be keeping a much closer eye on my son from now on. We were living in a new apartment in the San Francisco Bay Area. I had a 1-year-old son, and I was pregnant with my second child. I stayed home during the day with him. One day after lunchtime, I got a knock at the door, and when I looked through the peephole, I saw a guy wearing a shirt with the logo for an appliance company. It was like LG or Whirlpool or something. I opened up the door, and he said he was going around inspecting the appliances of the apartments to see who qualifies for new or replacement stuff. In my naive and pregnant brain state, I let the guy in. My son was super grumpy because it was his nap time, so I totally was not thinking and honestly barely listening to the guy, just trying to console a fussy toddler until we could nap. I assumed the apartment manager sent him or something. He quickly looked around at our fridge and all that, said thanks, and said we would get a call if we qualified. I mentioned this to my husband when he got home, and he told me it was super weird, and he had never heard anything like that happening before. When we mentioned it to the apartment manager, she said they hadn't sent anyone to do that and wasn't notified that anyone was. I also never got a call from the company, which, duh, they wouldn't even have my phone number. I never found out who the guy really was. He could have been a total scammer who was trying to scope the place to rob us. There were no reports of burglaries in any other apartments, though they were probably smarter than me and didn't let him in. If his intentions were to rob us, we're lucky because we were broke. Even my phone was junk at that point. We had no computer, no tablets, and all that he could have seen were some kids' toys and our old TV. Nothing of much value to anyone. Of course, my thoughts have turned more sinister than that, and I wondered if he had more malicious intent. But because I had a fussy toddler on my hip, he just kept up the ruse of doing his job and left quickly. Who knows? Just assumptions at this point. I have no way of knowing what he was doing, but I've always been way more cautious about trusting people just because they are in uniform or whatever. I don't let people I don't know into the house unless I'm expecting them, and I'm so glad this lesson was learned from a situation that ended up harmless. This happened when I was 12. I was babysitting for a family with 2 little girls. I babysat for them fairly frequently, and they lived around the corner. The father was weird and intense, and would ask me to do weird things, like be a bartender at a party they were throwing, or encourage me to try on his wife's clothing and play dress-up. He asked personal questions about my boyfriends and what I did with them, not that I had any. The wife, which should be noted, was never around for these interactions. One night I was babysitting, and after putting the girls to bed, I started hearing weird sounds from upstairs. I was about to call my dad to come investigate for me, when the father came down the stairs wearing nothing but his tidy-whities. He had been there the whole time waiting for his girls to go to bed. I jumped up and ran for the door, and he called after me that he hadn't been feeling so good, so he stayed home, and that he would pay me. I just left and booked it home. I was weirdly embarrassed, so I didn't tell my parents. I just decided I'd never babysit for them again. After that, my mum started getting weird phone calls while I was at school. Someone just breathing into the phone or asking if I was home. This was before cell phones and caller IDs, around the mid-90s. This culminated with her getting a phone call where a man told my mother that he was going to get me and detailed exactly what he was planning on doing to me. My mum never told me exactly what he said, but it was bad enough. She called the police. The police were able to track the number to the creepy father. I didn't know what was happening until the cops showed up to my school to escort me home, because the creepy father wasn't home. He was outside my room waiting for me. The man went to jail and then to the inpatient psych. He sent me letters from the hospital, which was in violation of the restraining order he had been granted, so we went from the hospital back to jail. Man in your underwear. Let's never meet again. This happened 8 years ago, during the summertime. I was at my mum's house, but she barely lived there anymore, but she spent most of her time at her boyfriend's, and my sister was very often left alone. I was a student in another city, but I came back in my house during these holidays. I was 19 and my sister was 16 at the time. Our house had 2 floors, a living room and a kitchen on the first, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second. The kitchen and living room had 2 door windows opening to a large terrace. From the terrace, you could go into the backyard by some stairs. We didn't really use the ground floor as it was very dark due to the small windows, and it was basically a garage and office just to do our homework. It's summer and very hot. I just discovered Game of Thrones and had 2 seasons to watch. Every evening, I took my laptop, made myself comfortable on the terrace near the kitchen, and watched an episode. My garden was surrounded by a U-shaped building, so you could see my terrace very well as my garden from the balconies. Some workmen were there for a few days and had been working late, so I often saw them as I watched my series. They were minding their own business, and I did the same and didn't think much of it. One morning I was sleeping late, and my sister woke me up with a whisper. "There's a man in the house." I was half naked because of the heavy heat of that summer. I stood up, perfectly awake now, grabbed a shirt and went downstairs practically running. I know this is a dumb thing I do, a half-naked, helpless young woman, but I'm very protective of my little sister, and I didn't feel any fear at this point. I went down to the kitchen and couldn't find a sharp object, so I took a fork, and when I asked her where she saw him, she told me she was watching TV in the living room, and because the windows were open, she saw a man in the reflection standing just behind her. She jumped off the couch to find herself in front of him. He was a tall man in his late 30s. She had no chance in a fight. The guy had one of his feet on the first step to the second floor where I was sleeping. She shouted, "Who are you?" to receive no reply, and just walked quietly back into the kitchen where the door window was wide open, and took the stairs back up to the garden. As soon as I heard that, I ran into the back garden with my harmless weapon to the gate in our front garden. I even went in the street looking for him. I'm sure that if I had found him, I would not have been so brave anymore, and would have maybe peed myself. But there was no one. Suddenly I realized my sister was still alone in the house, and perhaps he'd gone back. I returned to the kitchen, searched the house, but it turns out we were alone. That's when I realized my computer was missing. My sister told me that the guy didn't have anything in his hands when he left. That was the scariest part, because it meant he was either in the house for quite some time before he took the laptop and came back to do whatever he planned to do, or there was someone else there. I got dressed, and my sister and I went to the nearby police station. I'm very angry with the policeman. She was a minor, so stayed with her, and she told them everything and described the guy with a lot of detail. They asked if we could recognize him, and she said that, without a doubt, she could. They said, "You know, it's highly unlikely that we find him. You should be thankful that you and your sister didn't have anything worse happen." Almost like she needed to be more scared. When we got back home, she was afraid, and I was angry with the loss of my expensive laptop that I needed for art school and had all my pictures in it. We sat there at the terrace and spoke about what happened and how lucky we were that she saw the man before he came upstairs. This is when I noticed the workmen weren't there anymore. From my street, no one can even know we have a backyard and another entrance to the house. My sister told me he was acting like he knew a bit of the house. Maybe it wasn't the first time, and we didn't even notice he had been there before. I'm now certain it was one of those men working in that neighborhood balcony who'd been watching me that broke in that morning. From that day, we double-locked the doors and slept in the same bed for weeks. This happened a while back. I was probably around 10 to 11, meaning my brother, Alex, was around 8 or 9. We were walking home from the bus, which takes 7 minutes to do, when I noticed something was off. I didn't see anything at first, but I just knew something was wrong. So my brother and I started walking home. As the only two who got off at our stop, him and I, this blue and silver beat-up truck drives past us, and I think nothing of it. It never slowed down or stopped, it just kept on going. Alex and I were holding hands, as my grandmother always told me to do with him as he's my younger brother, and I don't want anything to happen to him. Nothing happens at first, but then the same truck drives around again, driving our way this time. There was a cul-de-sac at the end of our road, and it was driving slower this time as we went up the road and turned out of sight. Now Alex and I were nearing the three-way intersection that connected the cul-de-sac road to the other side road. Right up the main road, the man just drove down. I happened to look down the street and see the truck driving real slow down the street towards us again. I knew we had to run. I knew there was no other option. I knew that if we didn't, my brother and I would not be safe. I don't know how I knew, but I did. As soon as we passed a house that blocked us from view, I turned to Alex and spoke to him exactly 4 words. No questions. Just run. And we did. In our driveway, which is about 100 feet long, there's a row of bushes and pine trees that divides our home from the next door neighbor. I dragged him in there and told him to be quiet and that I would explain later. I watched as the same truck drove down around the cul-de-sac again, before coming to a stop right in front of our house. I had to hold my brother's mouth shut because he was crying, and I was scared whoever was following us would hear him and hurt us. I was more worried for his safety at this point than my own. I was in fight or flight mode. I was the big sister. I had to protect him. I looked at him and said the truck was following us, and I told him to not be scared. I said I wouldn't let anyone hurt him, and it seemed to calm him down a little bit. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the door to the truck opened and out came a man. He was tall, skinny and a mess. Short hair covered by a torn baseball cap, ripped jean shorts and a puke green tank top. He entered our yard and looked around a bit. Alex and I were still in the bushes, and I was trying to find a way to get to our house safely without getting this dude's attention. The guy left after what felt like forever and entered his car. He started to drive away slowly. I waited a few minutes to make sure he was gone before turning to my brother and saying, "We need to run. When I count to 3, we're going to run behind the house to the back door, okay?" He agreed, and we waited a few more seconds before I started counting. I still didn't have a good feeling about this, but I knew we had to move. I started counting. As soon as I hit 3, we booked it across our driveway and into our front yard to go around the house. As soon as we left our spot, I heard it, the sound of accelerating. He saw us. He waited for us to leave. He chased us up to our driveway as we ran around the side. I grabbed Alex's hand and practically dragged him around the house and made him run ahead of the garage door to see if it was locked while I searched for my house key. The guy, at this point, was about 20 feet away from me. The garage door was open, and I swear to God this man ran around the opposite corner of the house that we did as we entered the house. I entered and slammed the door shut, locking it and deadbolting it. I didn't stop running until I opened the house door and ran downstairs with Alex screaming our safe word. Our grandma made a safe word for us that was a normal word that we could use if we were in danger. We just had to scream it. It woke my aunt up, who worked the night shift and was asleep. We told her everything, and she stayed up with us until my grandma got home. We called the police, and that was my first time ever interacting with an officer. The man was never caught. To this day, I don't know what he wanted, but I know it wasn't good. I'm just glad my grandma drilled stranger danger into my head. I don't know where my brother and I would be right now if she hadn't. So to the messy man in the blue and silver truck, let's not meet again. When I was 13, I was home sick with the flu. I was walking past one of the windows when I saw the mailman walk across the street. Out of nowhere, a car came and hit him. The driver got out the car and started attacking the mailman repeatedly. It looked like he was doing it with a sharp weapon. He stopped and ran off down the street. I called my mom and told her what I saw, and she thought I was hallucinating. She told me to go lay down since I had a fever of around 103. When she got home, she noticed that I was obviously rattled from what I saw. Turns out the guy lived right around the corner from us and was severely deranged. They found him later that day. He was committed and his family moved out of town. The mailman lived and was back to delivering a few months later. I got kicked out of my house when I was 15, and I had been homeless periodically, and this was in one of those times. It was cold and I didn't want to be sleeping outdoors, so I had to go through social services, and they put me into what's called emergency housing. The people who approve of these standards need to be fired yesterday. They sent me to one of the worst neighborhoods ever, into a house where I was the only female with 4 grown men for housemates, and there was no one there supervising anything. Half the house was made up of a burnt-out porch. There were both rats, roaches of monstrous proportions, and usually no heat or hot water. Me and one of the guys ended up sharing a room. Jay, one of our other housemates. I never actually saw this guy and don't know even if he lived there anymore or what. Another one was actually decent, but he drank so much every night that he forgot how keys worked, and he was usually found passed out on the floor outside the door. And there was this guy from the Caribbean. We used to call him C. This dude was creepy as hell. He had a lot of questionable friends, and they knew that our front door lock generally didn't work, so it wasn't uncommon to just run into random people making grilled cheese sandwiches in the middle of the night when I went up to pee. Me and Jay also liked to mess with C because 1, we were stupid teenagers who didn't realize that these people were dangerous, and 2, we were both arses who didn't have much to do, and we liked to screw around with C because we kept telling him to stop lining his teeth up on the windowsill by the kitchen table when they fell out from all that usage. Because, you know, it's not the most appetizing thing to look at when you're eating. So one night, after a new tooth was added, we decided that we would just turn everything into the kitchen upside down and wait for him to come into the kitchen and pretend like it was perfectly normal. We spent 4 hours doing this, and it was almost impressive. It worked too, because he completely lost his mind after we kept telling him that the kitchen looked normal. Also, it should be noted that it was December, and we didn't have heat again, but this dude was jittering around the house in his tidy-whities, swearing like a sprinkler. So C went to his room and he's cursing and slamming things around in there. Jay goes to the bathroom, and I hear C come tearing out when Jay comes running into the room and slams the door looking terrified. He throws the chain locks on the door and tells me we've got to move the beds and dressers against the door, and that C has a sword or something. It was a machete, and the thing comes blade first through the door, just like The Shining, but with a crazy behind it. So we're frantically trying to move our mattress against the door and the dresser, and we have no other way out besides this window, but we're gonna have to go quietly as hell under his window and run through the woods into the dark to get to the nearest payphone to call the cops. Luckily, C is still making a lot of noise going at the door, so we're able to get past his window and the payphone. The cops were able to get to the house easily because the front door was still unlocked for everyone to come and go as they pleased. He was arrested fairly easily, as he's quite small and there were many cops. C had several outstanding warrants, so he ended up getting locked up for quite a while. J was and is a complete piece of garbage, unrelated to the story, and after this happening, social services thought that maybe this wasn't the best housing arrangement for me, and I was moved elsewhere. I never heard anything else about C after that, as there are a lot of even worse things that happened, and this event was put into the past, and for some reason it popped into my head. Maybe you didn't want to know this information, but as the story took place, me and Jay had ended up becoming a couple. I had to go to another state for a week, and when I got back, things between Jay and I were off. Long story short, my brother and my best friend, who incidentally is now my boyfriend, we've been friends for over 20 years and he's also my brother's best friend, found out that Jay had cheated on me during the whole duration I was away. Now my brother was a year younger than I, and out of everyone I've ever had in my life, he was true, and the true best friend, and we were extremely close. We both had the same friends, played in each other's bands, and were extremely close. So when my brother found out Jay had been cheating on me, he didn't take it kindly. And about a year later, my brother was taken from us. His life was ended. So being that me and my brother were so close, obviously this was the worst thing that ever happened in my life, and it devastated me and my family, especially my mum. A few weeks after that, I went to get food with my mum, and who's there? Jay. He found out what happened to my brother, and he starts mouthing off that my brother got what he deserved. I'm trying to get this guy, but my mum is begging me to just come with her and leave, and I didn't want to upset her anymore, so we went to the parking lot. This guy not only follows us out there, but he also pulls out a sharp instrument on us. I see red, because now he's threatening my mum, and I have this big-ass messenger bag that's crammed full of heavy stuff, and I swing it around as hard as I can and hit him on the side of the arm and head. He ended up dropping the implement, and I kick it away and pushed him as hard as I could and ran to the car. My mum had gotten into the car and started it and backed out, so she could have been readied out of there. All of this happened within a few seconds and we just took off. We didn't call the cops, because my family and I had more than enough to do with them, and they'd failed us on many times. So if any of you wondering why I didn't like Jay anymore, that is the reason. My parents were both DJs at a local Christian radio station in Birmingham at the time, and my sister was a kindergartner, so my parents were in need of childcare for me, and I was 4 and not yet in school. For context, this took place in the mid-80s. They really couldn't afford much in the way of a sitter, so they hired someone they thought they could trust, the teenage daughter of a co-worker. I believe her name was Shaniqua, and I don't remember much about her except she scared me, and rightly so. I'm grateful our brains have good coping mechanisms that we can't even control, because I don't really remember any of the events leading up to the revelation. I'm certain my brain has blocked all of those memories, but I remember this moment in time crystal clear, surprisingly for my age at the time. I remember it was night time, bath time before bed. My mother was downstairs on the phone, my sister had already had her bath, so it was my turn. My dad had run the water, tested it to be sure it was right, and I was standing in the bathroom wrapped in what seemed to be a huge bath towel, while I waited for him to give me the okay, get in the tub. In reality, it was probably just a regular sized towel, but to 4-year-old me, it seemed like the size of a bedsheet. My loving dad finished running the water, turned it off, and proceeded to tell me to hop in the tub. I was a silly little girl and thought it would be funny to get in and shake my booty at my dad, because what kid doesn't think booty shaking isn't hilarious? I clearly remember the mood suddenly getting very still and heavy. Then I heard my dad tell me to get out the tub. He was serious. I was certain I'd done something wrong. Maybe my booty shaking had made him mad. I was just trying to be silly, I didn't mean to get into trouble, but I obeyed and got out the tub. He gently wrapped me around my towel, reassured me I hadn't done anything wrong, but that I needed to go downstairs to my mama. I was so confused. I had no clue what was going on, but since I knew I wasn't in trouble yet, my dad was graven. Had something bad happened? I went down to my mama to wait for her to get off the phone and to hear what my dad had to tell her. While he stood there with his hands gently placed on my shoulders, my mum could tell by the serious look on his face and the confused look on my face that something was terribly wrong. She asked the person on the other end of the line to hold, covered the mouthpiece, and waited for my dad to explain what this turn of events meant. He gently told me to turn around while he unwrapped me from my towel, with my backside facing my mother. I heard her gasp, tell the person on the other end of the line she needed to go, and then silence. She didn't say anything for a long time, and then she asked my dad what happened. He had no idea. They asked me what had happened and who had done this to me. I had no idea what they were talking about. I was just as confused as they were. Then they told me my whole backside, especially my bottom, was completely black and blue. After some discussion onto how this could have happened, who could have done this, they realized it was the babysitter. She had taken it upon herself to punish me when I wasn't doing what she thought I should be, or what she deemed bad. I can recall very few times seeing my father that angry. Angry enough that he had no words, just raw fury. My mother, however, had plenty of words, and all of them directed at the babysitter and her mother. To this day I don't know what she said to her, but I do know that Shaniqua never watched me again, and I could not recall if I ever saw that family again. I know my parents didn't press charges, but I also know they became very, very vigilant when it came to someone watching their children. Just a year ago, my sister and I talked about that period of time when Shaniqua was our babysitter. She was mostly mine, but would watch my sister when she came home from kindergarten. I told my sister I can hardly remember any of the time she watched us, and I remember my sister going slightly pale and telling me, "I can." I asked her if she was ever punished by Shaniqua like how I was, and my sister told me this: "No, she never beat me. But I remember when she would beat you. I remember her taking you into the back room, and I remember hearing the wooden spoon hitting your butt and your crying. And I'm so sorry that I never stood up for you." I am an 18-year-old male, 6'1" and 190 pounds. I live in Seattle and work at a local grocery store, as my father insisted on me getting a job amidst coronavirus, and grocery stores are the few places hiring nowadays. I work at 5 a.m. and wake up at 4 a.m. I don't mind it because I get off early. It's still dark when I arrive at the store, and I always have to call the store to ask for the produce workers to let me in. As I was walking up to the door, I see an average-looking man, probably in his late 30s. He doesn't work at my store, and he was clearly tweaking out, moving around in crazy motions. Perhaps he was on something, and it was common to find needles in the bathroom of the store. As I was waiting for the door to be opened, he was facing me about 8 feet away, not looking at me, but past me. He was chanting some weird stuff, something like, "Satan will come, Satan knows." He kept repeating those lines. I was just standing at the door like, what is this dude on? Someone let me in already. Nothing else strange happens at work that day, and I get off at 9 a.m. as I'm the only worker who worked a 4-hour shift that day. As I'm driving home, I get a call and the ID said it was from a nearby city. I answer, and I can literally only hear a guy breathing. I'm just sitting there thinking this is some corny prank, since the audio was playing through the speaker of my car. His breathing was amplified, so I'm not sure if it was intentional. I read one time that if someone keeps you on the phone for long enough, they can get your IP address. I'm not certain of this though. He then says my full name in a tone of a question, but also weirdly strange and excited kind of way that made me feel tremendously uneasy. This was very stupid of me to confirm, but I said, "Yeah, who's this?" Then he pauses and hangs up. I realized a few hours later he sounded exactly alike to the Satanic dude from the morning, except sober. I get paranoid fairly easily, but this was a red flag and sent chills down my spine. I tried to call the number back, but as you imagine, it was disconnected. The next day I arrive at work with no troubles and leave at 9 a.m. I get home at about 9:20, but see my father's car in the driveway, as he is usually home at this time. The front door to my house was unlocked. I shouldn't think anything of this because my dad was at home, right? I walk in, take off my shoes, and call out for my dad because I brought in his mail. Before I explain this next part, you need to understand that many noises people hear are misidentified as something it truly is not, or their mind is playing games with them, or it's just the house making noises. But there was a very specific noise that my parents' bed frame makes because it's wood, when someone is rolling around on it. I know this sounds very well because my room is right next to theirs, and my dad is an extremely light sleeper, and anytime I drop something or make a relatively loud sound, I can hear him rolling on his bed as I disturbed him. I call out for my dad as I'm walking up the stairs, and there's no response, only the noise of that bed frame moving. I later that day rolled around in the bed to confirm the noise, and heard that you need a significant amount of weight on the bed to cause that sound. This was when I got scared as hell, because my dad wakes up very early and there's no way he was taking a nap at 9:30 a.m. I'm already at the top of the stairs at this point, so I burst into my room and closed my door and listened through our paper-thin walls, and I genuinely heard someone whispering, and then the springs releasing as if someone was sitting up on the edge and then stood up. If he was whispering, that means there could potentially be 2 people in the house, and I could be in real danger. I instinctually grabbed my dresser and dragged it in front of my door. That thing weighs about 150 pounds, and it took me a little while to drag it in front. My heart was pounding. I was worried that the intruder or intruders would catch on to what I was doing and break through the door before I had the chance to do it. I slammed the dresser down in front of my door to not waste any more time. No one was getting through that door. I felt slightly more relaxed and called my dad. I started to get nervous because he didn't answer, but he sometimes went on walks around the neighborhood at this time. Just as I tried to call him, I saw him walking up the street from our bedroom window and shouted that it wasn't safe for him to come into the house. At first, he laughed it off and then proceeded up the driveway, as nothing like this has ever happened. I repeated myself, but this time I screamed at him. Now he knew I was serious. He could see the fear in my eyes. He stepped back a few feet and asked what the hell was going on, and I felt I didn't really have time to explain and just told him to wait. Once I confirmed my father was safe, I dialed 911. And the intruders next to me must have heard it, because when I got off the phone they ran down the stairs. I was worried for my dad at this point because he was just outside, and I had to move the dresser again from my door as I was in a panicked state, and left my room and ran down the stairs to see nothing except my dad, who was still confused at this point about the back door being wide open. The cops got there 12 minutes later and came up with nothing. No evidence of forced entry, literally nothing besides the wide open back door and someone's mud tracked in the house, which really annoyed me. Could the man whispering have been the one who was talking to Satan the other day? How did he know my name on the phone? Can someone track you if they know your number and full name? Were these people trying to take me? This only happened a while ago, and I've been scared ever since, worrying they might return. I also have sleep paralysis and it's gotten a lot worse lately, and if you had it before, you know it sucks. So, that's my story. Feel free to leave a comment and write a note about your thoughts. When I was around 8 or so, we moved to a new neighborhood. Same state and general area, but completely new people. At the age of 8, I was nearly completely defenseless, and this will matter later in the story, because I had lost my leg to a car accident 3 years prior, and I was still learning to use a prosthetic leg. My house was the furthest one from the street, with only one way to the house, down the street. There were many houses that were very close to the street, and people could basically talk to you through their walls, they were so close. I'd never minded this, until I caught someone looking at me as I walked down the road. I thought nothing of it. Must have just been someone watching the road and animals, but I was wrong. I walked alone down the road every time. My parents could trust me to go by myself, and I just decided not to ask them to pick me up because of my leg. It was one single day that scared the ever-loving crap out of me. The dude was on the left side of the street, and I was on the right next to him. He just looked at me, and I guess he found me cute, because of the look on his face and how he said, and I wish he never had, "Hi, sweetie." I don't know him, he doesn't know me, but this weirded me out. I had a weird hairstyle and color, a lot of hair not going down too much and mainly in front of my face, ending at my eye with a whitish color. It was rare, and people had called me cute when I was younger, but hearing sweetie wasn't a rare occurrence. But the way he said it freaked me out, because behind his voice I could hear a very sinister intention. I almost began running when he said that, but I kept on walking as if it were nothing. He didn't move, just watched me as I went back home. His house was close to the intersection where my bus parked off, which makes this a lot worse. Every day for around a month, I would walk down the street and see him watching me, every day for longer and more obviously. It was one day that he was in the middle of the road looking at me. I wasn't very tall nor muscular at all, so I was defenseless against a 40-ish-year-old man. He just looked at me, and as I walked by him he turned around and started to follow me. I ran, but he caught up, and the next thing I know he tugged on my backpack and I fell over. He kept me down on the ground and looked at me to make sure there was no one nearby, and then dragged me near his house. And then luck had just hit like a train. As he was trying to drag me, a man was leaving his house parallel to his. He saw and immediately began to sprint towards me, and the guy just ran back to his house fast and left me. He started screaming to the man, picked me up, set me down on my feet, and said to go home before he tried something else. I ran back to my house and told my father, who, as you can imagine, was absolutely livid. I don't know what happened after that, but all I know is that I never saw the man again. I've been fishing the backwaters for about 1.5 years now, both in canoe and on boat. The first few times I was out there, however, I was just fishing from land near Biscayne Bay. Keep in mind, this is not far out wilderness. I walked at most 1 kilometer from the nearest walking trail through the mangroves to find a fully loaded establishment, built from both driftwood and wood brought in from the mangroves. I'm talking a 3-story loft with a bar and stools on the first floor, a ladder leading up to a platform midway through the canopy where you can access a bathroom, which is a hole in the floor, and the 3rd floor, a viewing platform with a sofa 20 feet above ground. The only way up these makeshift floors is through a shoddy handcrafted driftwood ladder. I asked my buddy how is any of this possible, and he said, well, I've never seen the man responsible for this, and nor I am sure I really want to meet him, considering we're trespassing in someone's luxury mangrove suite. I thought it'd be best to get the hell out of there. This happened a few years ago, and we don't know exactly who this man was, but it still scared me senseless. When I was around 13, I used to have a bed right under my bedroom window. It was also around the time my dog was brought inside because she was too old to stay out. At the time we didn't have a screen covering, and we now do. So the window could easily be opened and there was no barrier. I always left my window open during the day to let in fresh air, then close and lock it when it started getting dark. My house is surrounded by forest, not very thick, but still thick enough that you can't see clearly through it. It's completely normal hearing strange noises at night, because things like bears or stray dogs or even our former neighbor's chickens that would roam around our yard. So when I heard something shuffling around my window, I didn't pay it much mind and continued playing video games. Not 10 minutes later, I heard something hit against it. I thought it may have been a June bug. When they hit a window, they can sound like rocks, so I ignored it, and the knocking kept on going, but I just kept ignoring it, and it finally stopped. Fast forward to 2 a.m. I was finally sitting down and going to sleep when I hear breathing. Very faint, enough to miss if my room wasn't silent. I heard something drag down my window like a stick or a finger. It did it a few times, and that was enough for me. I jumped out of bed and ran to my dad's room. I told him that there was something at my window and he immediately came to look. We turned out the light so he could see better, but there was nothing. I told him what I heard and he said we would take a look in the morning. We did just that, and my stomach churned. Under my window there were 2 different foot tracks, one back and forth besides the generator, and one that was back and forth directly under my window. There were even cigarette butts laying around near some bushes, like he had crouched there and waited. The foot tracks led towards the woods. We have neighbors that live through the woods and down the hill. They are very trashy, so we chalked it up to one of them coming up here drunk. Though what scared me the most about all this was the fact that when I went to open my window later that day, I found it was unlocked. I forgot to lock it the night before. We could have gotten in without issue. I was around 12 when I had gotten a babysitting job with a family across town. This family was new to the area and just recently bought the house next to my best friend's place. The first day over was to get familiar with the kids and the house. The parents stayed and evaluated me and of course answered any questions I had. I spent my time playing and keeping the children occupied. A boy named Devon, age 4, and a girl named Cameron, age 7. So I had my work cut out for me. Cameron wanted me to go to her room so she could show me her toys. I followed her up the 2 flights of stairs, but as we came to the top of the stairs, I felt strangely lightheaded, and the hairs on my arms rose up. I had an intense feeling of being watched, like there was someone else up there with us. I tried to ignore the sensation and continue with my duties of finding Cameron's favorite doll so that we could go back downstairs. At the end of the day, it was decided I was a good match and I was coming back on Saturday morning. As I headed home, I couldn't shake that feeling I got from that upstairs. I told myself it was nothing and brushed it off to just being a new place and unfamiliar surroundings. That Saturday morning, I showed up to a busy home as the parents tried to get out the door and show me the last-minute things I needed for the day ahead. The kids were up in their PJs eating breakfast and already talking to me about all the fun things they wanted to do. After the parents left, I ushered the kids off to get changed. As I was cleaning up breakfast dishes, I heard the loud bang coming from the dining room. I ran into the room and found one of the false ceiling tiles had fallen from its place. Puzzled, I tried to put it back, but it wasn't an easy task. After some struggling, I managed to fit it back in, and thought to myself how it could have fallen out by itself. The day went on, and now it's close to lunchtime. The kids are watching TV, and I'm in the kitchen making something for lunch when I hear a loud bang coming from the dining area again. I look, and sure enough, the tile has come out again. This time I left it for the parents to see when they got home. Maybe they can fix it, I thought. Now, the kids wanted to play hide and seek. We started off with Cameron seeking and myself and Devon hiding. As Cameron started, we scurried around trying to find the best hiding place. I found the downstairs bathroom to be the best place for me, so it was easy enough for Cameron to find me, and I hid Devon close to me so I could keep an eye on him. As I entered the bathroom, I closed the door quietly behind me. I walked a few steps into the room and was now facing the mirror. As I was looking at my reflection, I also noticed something behind me, moving. It was the closet door directly behind me, slowly opening. The closet door opened halfway and then slowly closed again on its own. I had the same feeling come over me like I did when I was upstairs on my first day. Wide-eyed with fear, I turned to the bathroom door and ran out. All I could think of was what just happened. I was really starting to worry that this house was haunted, and now I had every horror movie I ever watched playing through my head. Now I'm finding I'm really uncomfortable, but decide it's best for me to keep occupied. I break out a board game for us to play on the living room floor. Hungry Hippo. We were playing for about 20 minutes before I noticed something moving from the corner of my eye. I turned my head to see what it was, and it was a child's shoe tumbling across the floor by itself. The kid stopped and watched in confusion. I was in disbelief. Cameron let out a scream and she ran for the door. I grabbed up Devon and followed. We went to my friend's house next door and told her mum everything. I'm not sure if she even believed me, but we stayed over there till the parents got home. Then they showed up and told them what we saw. I don't think they believed me either. I showed them the panel that fell out. Apparently it's been an issue since they moved in, and as for the rest of my accounts, they chalked it up to an overactive imagination. I know what I saw and felt, and I wasn't imagining it. I later found out a bit of backstory about the house itself. Apparently a man passed away there of a heart attack in the upstairs room above the dining room, where the panel kept falling out. I think his spirit is still in that house, trying to play with us. This happened last night and the night before. A little backstory first. I live in a not too safe area. The block I'm on is okay, but if you walk down my street a block or two, you get to a very sketchy area. When we leave the house, we head up a side street that gets us away from trouble. Like I said, my block isn't bad. We all get along here. Most people on this block are related to each other. All but for my household. But even though we are strangers to the neighbors, they're nice to us. The people right next door have dogs as well as a few other households. Again, we are the odd ones out of the departments as well. The dogs only bark when someone is on our block that doesn't live here. I've always felt safer because of the dogs. I live in a home converted into a duplex. When you walk in the front door, you are in the entryway, and then across the entryway you see my apartment door. Then if you go up the stairs beside my door, you will find the door to the second apartment. The front door to the house has no lock mechanism at all. It's so tenants cannot lock each other out of the house. We can only lock the doors of our apartments. So when you come into the entryway, a motion sensing light comes on. No one is currently living upstairs. So at this time it's just me and my husband living in the place. 2 nights ago my husband was in bed. I was up watching TV. I was all relaxed and thinking about going to bed. It was nearly 1 a.m. And suddenly I get this overwhelming, uncomfortable feeling. I feel hot and sick in my stomach, and I had the intrusive thought that I needed to go check the apartment door to make sure it was locked. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't. So I resort to getting up to look. Just as I got there, I heard someone open the screen door on the outer house door. I looked and the door was locked. Then I had the actual door to the house open and someone step into the entryway. I was terrified. I know no one who lives upstairs, and my landlord said he would let me know if someone was moving. You don't get visitors this late, or without a phone call first. And also with this pandemic and social distancing, no one should be coming over anyway. Then I heard a click. I recognized the click as the sound of the motion lights. It's turned on. Then I hear a male voice go, "Oh, crap," and the sound of someone running out the house. I was terrified and stood there trying to process what happened. From the time I heard the screen door until a solid minute after the person ran out, I stood there frozen. The neighborhood dogs were barking their heads off all night, and they only do that if someone they don't know is around. I think that someone who didn't know that the house is a duplex attempted to let themselves in. The light, which is way too bright for that tiny entryway, came on and scared them away. I woke up my husband and called the police, and they said that since the person was not trying to get into my apartment exactly, they weren't coming out. The best they could do was super comforting, which was drive by the apartment a few times. Great. Last night, I was up late again. The dogs were barking like crazy. At a little after midnight, I heard a noise. I mute the TV and realize someone is pounding on the outer house door. Not my apartment door, thank goodness. I was freaked out. I wanted to go in and wake up the husband, but thought better of it. There's a window beside the outer house door where he was knocking, and that window is our bedroom window. Because my husband was asleep and the lights were on in the living room, but off in the bedroom, I thought if I opened the door, the person standing out on the porch hammering on the door would see the light, and therefore know someone was there. And I was afraid to let whoever was out there know I was home. I sat here for over 10 minutes of banging. It was not stopping. I thought maybe it was the police because of the call I made the night before. So I called the police and told them what was happening, and asked if it could be police at my door. He looked into it and said that whoever it wasn't the police, as well as not to open the door. He said he was sending police out, and if someone was still banging on the door, they would walk to them, and he said he would call when he knew what was going on. The banging stopped about 5 minutes after hanging up with the police dispatcher, but I never got a phone call, so I don't know if the police did ever show. Tonight the dogs were already barking, and I've been barking for the past hour. My husband decided that I'm going to bed early, and he's staying up. I doubt I'll sleep anyway. I made him promise that no matter what, if he hears something, not to unlock our front door. If there are any more shenanigans tonight, well, I don't even want to know. This happened a few months ago in the summer, when I had just moved to a new house. There's a community pool just down the road, and the day after we moved in, I went there with some friends. But after an hour or so, I decided to go home because it was too hot. As I walked out of the pool's parking lot, a car also pulled out of it and stopped right next to me. The driver shouted something out to me, but I couldn't hear what he said. So, being stupid, I went closer to see what it was he wanted. "Are you the new girl who just moved in at house number 5? I was confused, but again being stupid, I said, "Yeah." He told me that he just dropped his girlfriend's kids off at the pool and was just on his way home when he saw me, and offered to give me a lift home. He might have been my neighbor, but he was a stranger in a car. I've never met him before, and there's no way I was getting in, even if there was aircon. "Thanks, but I'm okay," I said, and kept on walking. He then said something that I still think is bizarre, and I don't know why, if it was a tactic of some sort, but he asked me if I at least wanted some candy. I was tired and hot, and it was the most stranger danger cliche I'd ever heard in my life. I'm 17. I don't want your candy. As soon as I said this, he apologized and told me, "Oh, I thought you were the younger one," and finally drove away. Now immediately this put me on edge, because I took that comment to mean that he was probably talking to me, because he thought I was younger, which made my skin crawl. I also don't even know who he was talking about because I have a twin and a younger sister, and he thought I, 17, looked way younger. I told my stepdad about what happened and he just played it off as me being paranoid. But I made sure that I told both my sisters, as they also thought it was creepy as hell. I'm a 30-year-old female, and we live in a small town in South Africa, in an area that's quite susceptible to robberies and break-ins. Now, our bedroom used to be the old carport, so it's closest to the street, passing the front of the house where we have a big-ass tree in the middle of our driveway. The street lights tend to be broken a lot, so a lot of the times it's completely dark out front. Now, this particular night, or maybe early morning, it was definitely after midnight, I heard a strange noise. I didn't know whether it was a dream or not since I used light sleeping medication, but it sounded so clear. The sound of a stick or something being dragged along the entire length of the side of the front fence. Up and down, up and down. In my stupor, I wanted to get up and go have a look at what or who it was that was making the noise, but I didn't, and after a while just kind of fell asleep again. The next morning when we were getting ready for work, I told my husband what I'd heard. Now, he said that he didn't hear anything like that himself, but since he's quite a heavy sleeper, that's not really odd. But that his friend, who lives just 2 houses down from the road, told us a similar story just the week before. The difference here is that he actually went out with his firearm to confront whoever was in the street, and found some weird skinny guy in front of his gate, holding a machete, dragging it along the fence. He yelled at him to get off their property, but the guy just stood there, seeming to be quite stoned. He didn't even register that someone was there, yelling at him. It was only after our friend actually fired a warning shot that he ran off. We heard later that apparently the skinny guy is some homeless person that's been taking illegal substances and wandering around the neighborhood causing trouble, and that the police were looking for him for quite a while. But I haven't seen the guy nor heard the sound or anything about that since. I'm fairly sure it's the same guy, but I'd rather not find out. A little backstory. I was a strip dancer for 6 years. I worked in many cities and clubs. At the time of this story, I wasn't a rookie. I was very well versed in the industry. At the time this took place, I was about 20 or 21. It was also in Texas, at one of the upscale clubs, and I never imagined something like this would happen in this place, but apparently I was wrong. I started my shift at 6 p.m. I liked to get there early, meet some of my regulars before the crowd came in. It was about 8:30 to 9, and this really good-looking guy came in with some friends. They were all older, 40 to 45. I grabbed some of my hustle friends and we went and sat with them. It wasn't hard to convince these guys into a VIP room with bottled service, but this is where it went kind of weird. The guy I was talking to wanted a separate room just for us. I thought maybe because his friends seemed rowdy and wanting to party hard, he wanted to have a more relaxed area. I wasn't complaining, because that meant I wouldn't have to share my cut of the room. So stupid me saw dollar signs and went in. We got 2 bottles of Dom Perignon, some mixed drinks and shots. Now, a lot of these guys that come into the clubs really want to let loose and brought substances too. These guys had just about everything, and I was definitely a party girl at the time, so I partook in some of these, but I also wasn't stupid. So at the time we were all hanging out in one room together. I took a little hit of something and continued drinking. After we were all hyped up and ready to party, my guy pulled me over into the other room. This guy was 6'4", obviously worked out a lot and was attractive. I, on the other hand, without my heels, was 5'6" and like 120. I sat on his lap and started talking to him and laying my moves down to get him to empty his wallet. We were having a really good conversation, and my bouncers were really good about checking up on the girls in the rooms, because they are pretty secluded on the second floor. After 20 minutes of talking, something snapped, and all of a sudden he literally puts his hands around my neck, lifted me up and slammed me against the back of the couch. The couch backs were tall and padded, so it wouldn't have been heard on the other side without the music. I was frozen in fear. After almost 3 years of dancing, I'd never been in this situation. He started calling me names, spat in my face, and his grip around me would get tighter. He would then feel me take a deep breath, like I was going to scream. Luckily, there were also VIP rooms across the large overlook, and a bouncer noticed me kicking and flailing. I faintly remember all of the bouncers running into the room. They had to pry me out of his hands. When I was finally back sitting on the couch, they had him on the floor outside the room, and his buddies acted like they didn't even know him. My manager grabbed me and carried me like a baby to the dressing room, asked if I needed any medical, and I said no and that I was just shaken up. His buddies talked to my manager and basically gave me guilt money for this happening. Apparently he was going through some rubbish divorce and snapped on me instead of his ex. When I was around 12, my family and I moved into a semi-detached house just up the street from our previous home. The house wasn't very big, and the floor plan for our part of the house was completely different from our neighbours. Our neighbours were a lovely little family of 4. Husband is from England, wife from Norway, which is where I live, and they also had a 3-year-old girl and a 6-month-old baby boy. Now I love children, always have, and at that time I really wanted to start babysitting. It's quite common to start babysitting at age 12, and I was turning 13 in a month later anyway, so I wanted to find some small job. As we got to know our neighbours over the first few months of living there, my parents told the neighbours that if they ever needed a sitter, then it would be nice if they would consider trying me out. Seeing as it would be my first job as a babysitter, we thought it would be smart to start with my next door neighbours, seeing as my parents would literally be on the other side of the wall in case anything happened. Got to a Friday night when my neighbours went to a party that was happening just down our street. I got there at 8 p.m, and the parents told me they would be home around 2 to 3. Both kids were already asleep, so they just told me to put a movie on and relax. Now these kids were the easiest to babysit ever. Once you put them to bed and they fell asleep, absolutely nothing would wake them. They are some of the heaviest sleepers I've ever seen, so babysitting them was usually pretty uneventful. I was on the couch watching Avatar in the living room on the 2nd floor. The kids had their own separate bedrooms that were just downstairs where the front door was. I could basically see their bedrooms from where I was sitting, as the place was quite small. Because of the hallway, I couldn't see the front door. Now again, this house was very small, so as long as the TV wasn't on too loud, then I could hear everything that happened downstairs. At around midnight I heard the front door unlock, and my neighbours walked in there while talking. I heard them close the door, and that they started taking off their jackets and shoes. I thought it was a bit weird that they hadn't called to let me know that they were coming home early. I just assumed that it must have slipped their mind, so I went down to greet them. I could hear them talking, up until the point that I came around the corner to the hallway that led to the door, to find there wasn't anyone there. The talking fell silent the moment I turned the corner, and the only sound that could be heard was from the upstairs TV. My heart started beating so fast and my head was rushing. I ran to the bedrooms and checked the kids before I searched the rest of the house. I opened every door, checked every cabinet for anything that could explain what had just happened. But there was nothing there. The kids were still sound asleep. Eventually, I convinced myself I was imagining things. I checked on the kids one last time and made sure the doors were wide open so that I could see them from upstairs. I sat down to finish the movie while trying to process what had just happened. But when I sat down, I noticed the TV had been shut off, even though I'd left it on. When I turned it back on, there was just snow on the screen. I couldn't for the life of me get it to work again. That's when the talking downstairs started up once more. Not only that, but the baby started screaming. This child never woke up from naps and definitely would never scream the way it did that night. I've never ran so fast in my life down the stairs. I rushed towards the baby's bedroom only to find the door closed. I ripped it open, picked up the baby and rushed to pick up his sister, and took both of them upstairs and held those kids for almost 3 hours before they came home. The talking and sounds downstairs came and went as I had the kids with me on the couch. I held them as close to me as I could and tried my best to keep them asleep. As their parents came home, I was too scared to walk downstairs to greet them. I couldn't be sure if it was actually them or not until they walked up the stairs where they found me clutching their children. Obviously, they noticed I was upset and asked me what happened. I honestly felt like I'd lost my mind at that point, but told them the story anyway. After I was finished, they told me that it wasn't the first time that anything like that had happened there. Apparently, they heard the voices all the time at night. I was kind of mortified that they didn't think to warn me before, but they said they were sorry that this happened to me, and the mum walked me home to my house. I slept with the lights on in my room for almost a month after that. Believe it or not, I did go back and I babysat those kids again. I live with my mum in a house that we bought a year and a half ago, but only moved in 6 months ago because all of the renovations that needed to be done to it were quite demanding. Often when it was in the reno stage, I would go over there at night and hang out, and almost every time I was there, I would hear these creepy creaky noises. They freaked me out, especially since the renovations included adding a whole wing to the house, which made it very easy for unwanted guests to enter. However, I know that houses make sounds, so I tried to forget about it. One late night during the reno phase, I went over to the second house and punched in the garage code. You can hear the garage open from pretty much anywhere in the house if you're not making too much noise. As the garage began to open, I heard loud sounds like pots and pans being banged together, although we didn't have any in the house at the time. To be honest, I was terrified, just standing there trying to decide what I was hearing and what I should do about it. Ultimately, I decided to close the garage and go back home. I've not heard anything like this before or since. After this, I only went to the house if I had someone with me, and a few months later my mum moved in. Fast forward to present day. The creepy house noises that I heard in the reno phase have been diminished, but I still hear them almost exclusively at night, as I regularly stay up late. They sound like someone's accidentally knocking their elbow against the door. Nothing to be too concerned about, but I always sleep with my fan on because I sleep in late, and the white noise blocks out any potential sounds that might scare me. Last night I wanted to conserve energy, so I didn't turn it on. I was laying in bed, lights off, when I heard what sounds like my basement door closing. It was 5 a.m, so definitely not my mum. I continued to hear what sounds like shuffling noises coming down the hall towards my room. My mum's bedroom is on the other side of the house, so she wouldn't hear this. I dialed 911, but didn't press call trying to rationalize. After a few minutes of hearing nothing, I turned on my fan but kept my phone turned on the phone app. 911, still dialed. Eventually I went to sleep. I have foster kittens that sleep in a dog crate near my mum's room. This morning one of them was acting peculiar, very scared, hiding, and hissing whenever I went near him. I've had him for a week, and he's only exhibited his behavior in the first day. And he was fine when I put him to bed last night. His brother is a lot more laid back than him, and I haven't noticed a change in his behavior. I'm not entirely sure I would, since he's better with strangers. Tonight I'm going to put tape on the attic and basement doors, and I sincerely hope they're there when I wake up tomorrow. I haven't told my mum my concerns because I have a history of drug abuse. Although I'm sober now, and although I've never had any hallucinations or delusions, she jumps to conclusions. I just went to the room that's adjacent to the room with the attic to grab my charger, and swore I heard something move. I had my kittens in both hands, so I put them in the crate and grabbed a weapon and went back, but I heard nothing, and I was too scared to do anything, but I'm in the other room and keep hearing sounds. The next morning, I spent half the night in the room besides the hallway which contains the attic and basement door, listening, weapons at the ready. At around 1 a.m., I heard what I thought was unmistakably someone moving around in the other room. I dialed 911 but didn't call, scooped up my kittens and weapon and knocked on my mum's bedroom door. This woke up my dog, who has a bad sense of sight and smell, startles very easily, and that's why I don't rely on him, who started to bark very loudly. I told my mum I thought someone was in the house. She walked the dog around our house perimeter while I cleared the rooms in the hallway except the basement and attic, but nothing. I got the step ladder and climbed to the attic after my mum definitely confirmed it was empty of humans. We then checked the basement. It's an unfurnished crawl space that leads to a door on our porch. We didn't check the crawl space. I put tape on the basement door, but I stayed up all night in the living room with the lights and TV on loud so the hypothetical person wouldn't think I'm sleeping and sneak around. I have my brother and father coming over tomorrow, so I'm just going to get them help me out with things. Just so you know, I live in a smaller town, so there's no non-emergency number I can call. I'm almost convinced it could just be animals, but I'm going to put flour on the basement stairs as well. The tape on the door was undisturbed, but I've heard those sounds. Having someone live in your house is so uncommon, but as I mentioned, my mind tends to jump to the worst conclusion when you don't have a lot of evidence. In 2012, I was 11, and my family had gone to Brighton in England to see the rest of the pack. I live in Ireland, so it's a short and easy journey over that we did quite regularly, at least 2 to 3 times a year. Therefore, my sister and I were familiar with Brighton and its streets. One day my sister and I met with our cousins, both girls, and my sister was the eldest of 14 at the time. Then my older cousin, who was 13, and I was 11, and my youngest cousin was 10. So we were all fairly young. We decided to go for a quick walk from my aunt's house to go over to the corner shop. It must have been about 5 minutes from the house, so not far at all. It was the middle of the day, and my parents had no issue with us doing something as innocent as going to the corner shop. We make our way down and buy our goods. Can't beat a dib-dab on a hot day. We left the shop and were hanging about outside, eager to eat our sweets before we got home, so we didn't get shouted at. That's when we were approached by a man. My memory of what he looked like is hazy, but I recall him being around 60 years old, white hair, slightly stooped over. I remember him hanging back away from us, watching from a nearby alley. My cousin and I were young. We just thought this was funny. Something embarrassing and laughable. We start walking away when we notice him out of the corner of our eyes. Again, we found this funny. I don't ever recall being educated on the risks of stranger danger in school. This was just something I would have laughed at. Slowly, he started catching up with us. We just thought this was a big game. I could smack 11-year-old me for being this immature. The corner shop we were originally at was near a roundabout in a little, so we began crossing the road at the roundabout. We did this several times just to see if he would still follow, and he did. We got into the car park at Lidl and he approached us. Now he was within talking distance, like the distance between you and a friend. He was muttering incessantly under his breath, and I couldn't exactly make out what he was saying. I do recall hearing small words, such as swine and other things. And that's when our giggles got a bit quieter. Now Brighton is slightly rife with issues due to mental illness and addiction. It has a high homeless rate, and even at 11 I understood this. The auntie I had been staying with at the time is a psychiatric nurse, and she was inundated with clients and patients from Brighton. When he approached us and broke that intimate, invisible bubble that sets social expectations and normality, I got a chill. This small interaction in body language seems tiny and superficial, but anyone that's been in a bad situation knows what I mean by that weight that suddenly falls on your chest, full of foreboding and dread. It's hard to exactly define it, but it terrified me. I think my sister and my cousin got this feeling as soon as I did. It wasn't playtime anymore or mockery. This was bad. I don't know what it was, but I knew we had to leave and leave fast. We started to walk away from this man without uttering a word to each other. We all knew. We walked quite fast and began to follow the road to the house. Of course, he followed us. This time, however, he was faster. We were genuinely scared. This man was following us, four blatantly young girls, and if he continued, he'd know where we were staying. This was when a guardian angel in disguise swooped in to help us. It was very sudden. A woman and her 3 children came out of a cafe on the other side of the road and ran across the road to our side. We then formed a strange circle as we walked, her children, who were the same age as us it seemed, at the front, me, my sister and my cousins in the middle, and this woman in the back. She ushered us along quickly and quietly and kept saying, "Keep walking until I say to stop. Don't look back." The man started losing sight of us when the woman walked us home. I think he lost interest once he saw the woman and her band of tiny soldiers. We got in the house, terrified and shaken up, and the woman told my mum and my auntie what happened. They were naturally petrified. It turns out the woman had been watching the interaction from the cafe the entire time. From the corner shop to the car park, she said that this man was notorious for being a predator, and that she recognized him as a well-known one in Brighton. I don't remember much after that apart from my family being scared. I don't know what would have happened if this woman had not helped us. Our immaturity and naivety could have seriously harmed us. If I could meet this unnamed heroine, I'd thank her profusely. Now at 19, I recognize this man as someone who probably had issues with mental illness or addiction, and I hope he's not causing himself or others harm. In any case, let's not meet again. I'm a female, 27. At the time of this story, I was 19. I was living in Littleton, which is a suburb of Denver. I lived and worked within the same block, working at a hair salon, and lived in an apartment across the street and behind the salon. I lived with 4 other people in a studio apartment. Yes, it was chaos, but I was young and dumb and worked so much I was only there to sleep. While working at the salon, I met people of all walks of life. Most were nice and hard-working like me. In the plaza where the salon was, there happened to be an abundance of loiterers, homeless drunks mostly, and there was a particular man who I often saw. He was an older gentleman. He always smelt like booze, but was nice enough. Quite the flirt, which was uncomfortable for 19-year-old me. On several occasions, he asked me to come hang out and drink with him. I always refused because of my boyfriend, telling him that he wouldn't be pleased. And for the life of me, I'm pretty sure his name is Mort. One afternoon after getting off work at around 4, I started to meander my way across the parking lot to the coffee shop. I ordered my drink and took it outside to sit and enjoy the sunny weather. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Mark approaching me rapidly, a broad smile across his face asking me for a lighter. Begrudgingly, I obliged, passing it all over, and Mark lights his cigarette and returns the lighter to me. As he's not so graceful, he brushes past my arm, and a disgusted chill ran up my spine. I pulled away and stood up, saying it was time for me to go. Mark begged me to come and drink with him again, and I refused. After that, I didn't see him for several weeks. It was bliss, since I felt like he was always lurking around the plaza, waiting for some sorry soul to look his way. Then one night I decided to go for a walk around the neighborhood. I preferred night walks because it wasn't so hot, and I went around through downtown Littleton and looped back to my apartment complex. Then, as I was about 10 minutes away from home, a figure appeared on the walkway ahead of me. At first, I thought nothing of it, since a lot of people were out and about. But as I got closer, I recognized the person. It was Mark. He swayed this way and that way on the cement, nearly falling into the road. This is where I made my mistake. I should have crossed the road or turned around, but instead I decided to walk past him, hoping he wouldn't know who I am. Alas, no dice. Mark got in my way and stopped, smiling that broad smile once again. I sighed, resigned my fate of having to talk to him, and asked him how he was and if he had a good day. He said he did, but that it would be better if he had some drinking company. I said not I, because I had to work early in the morning the next day, but unfortunately he was unbothered and continued to beg, trying the drunk puppy dog eyes on me. I was slightly uneasy, but otherwise unmoved. Laughing awkwardly, I tried to edge my way around him. He held out his arm, blocking my path with a serious face, and I demanded that Mark move out of my way so that I could go home. For some reason, this flipped a switch within him. Suddenly angry, he grabbed me by the arm, holding me tightly. I winced and tried to shake him off, but Mark wouldn't relent. He took another step towards me, grabbed my other arm, and immediately I knew it was going to bruise. The pain sent me into fight or flight. My body picked both. First, I shoved Mark hard into the shrubbery behind him. Then I took off, sprinting down the sidewalk. I didn't stop until I burst through the doors of my apartment, dissolved into tears, and fell to the floor. I alarmed my roommates, and they comforted and questioned me. After I pulled myself together, I told them what Mark did. My boyfriend was furious and stormed out the room with a bat in hand and his friends hot on his heels. My other roommates stayed with me. When my boyfriend and his friends returned, they said, luckily for Mark, that they couldn't find him. We thought of calling the cops, but rejected the idea because we weren't totally on the right side of the law, as pot wasn't legal in our state yet. So instead I brought pepper spray and started carrying a weapon with me, and it did make me feel much safer. But I stopped going on walks after dark, unless I was in the company of my boyfriend. Strangely, I never saw Mark after that night, though I was completely okay with it. So wherever you are, Mark, just leave me alone next time, or I may be forced to poke a hole in you. This next story also happened while living in Littleton, Colorado. So that you might better understand me, this was when I was also 19. To give you a better image of what I looked like, I was 5'7" and 130 pounds, and had wildly colored red hair, several facial piercings, and arm and chest tattoos. It was a warm day, so I was wearing weather-comfortable clothes, shorts and a tank top, along with a pair of flip-flops and a sun hat. Because of the previous situations I found myself in, I've stopped taking night walks. Instead, I went in the late afternoon. I had let my boyfriend take my truck to work because I didn't have to work that day and had no plans, but I wanted to surprise him at work and take him to dinner after he got off. So I started walking up Broadway towards Colfax. Now, if you've ever lived in Denver or have been there for any amount of time, people will generally warn you about Colfax Avenue. It's busy, and some sketchy wildlife lives there and stalks the street. But for some reason, my oh-so-awesome roommates did not warn this little girl about the many horrors that could await you on Colfax Avenue. Okay. That may be a tad dramatic, but my experience was not pleasant in the least. I turned from Broadway onto Colfax. As soon as I turned, I was stepping into another world almost. There was a bus stop and it was bumping. I'm pretty sure I saw a guy taking bumps pressed against the nearest building. Several homeless people were laying and sitting in various places in the street. Two women were screaming at each other about something, and I walked quickly 2 or 3 blocks with my heart in my throat. I'm not cut out for this sort of social interaction. I accidentally made eye contact with a dirty man lurking in an alleyway. Quickly, I looked down at my flip-flops and walked on. After a few blocks, the crowd thinned out a bit, and I was feeling less frazzled. I was actually starting to enjoy my walk and the people watching what I was doing. But then I noticed this van. It was parked on a side street, trying to look inconspicuous, because I could see the driver slide down his seat a little. I couldn't make out the details, but I could see it was an older male with a dark complexion and short dark hair, trying not to stare for too long. I committed this creeper van to memory. It was white with darkened windows, no company markings and no front license plate. Red flags are going off in my head, but I push away the feeling and I walk around another block or two to see the van on a side street. It's moved up a few blocks as well. I get a nervous chill. Though I press on trying not to look scared, after another couple of blocks I see this van again. I don't like where I think it's heading, so I stand my ground to face this van, staring into this man's face and waiting for a reaction for him to notice me. To my horror, he gets out the van, slamming the door behind him. He's a small Hispanic man, about 5'4", and shorter than me, but definitely bigger. My mind is racing as he runs down the road towards me. I'm frozen. I wasn't expecting this. As soon as he reaches me, he starts speaking in broken English that I can mostly understand. He compliments me, my hair, piercings, freckles, and butt. Oh joy, awkward. Awkwardly I thank him, now confused. What does he want? Why is he so brave? Then he asks for intimacy. I nearly choke and ask him to repeat himself, not sure if I heard him correctly, but I was. He pulled out his wallet and offered me 2 $100 bills. I take a large step back as he grabs my butt and then licks his lips. I harshly tell him I'm not that kind of girl, and he's barking up the wrong tree. I turn and speed walk away from this guy, starting to panic, and I'm trying to think of a plan. The man is following me, waving the 200s around like it would convince me to go back. The first door I see I run to and yank open. I throw myself in at max speed and bounce to the bouncer. I fall on my butt with a yelp, and the bouncer helps me up and asks why I'm in such a hurry. I'm too flustered to talk as he's asking for ID. I look around and realize that I'm in a pub. I tell him on the verge of tears I'm only 19 and trying to hide from a guy outside. I'm practically having a panic attack as the bouncer guides me to the bar and fetches me a glass of water. The bouncer wants a description of the man and I give it. He tells me to hang tight and disappeared round the door. A few minutes later he tells me the wham won't be a problem anymore. Reasonably, I'm still scared. My new hero asks me where I'm heading and I check on my GPS on my phone. Only 2 blocks to my boyfriend's work. The bouncer clocks out on his break and offers to walk me the remaining 2 blocks. I beam and latch onto the guy's arm, thanking him repeatedly. He pats my hand, laughing, telling me to keep off Colfax from this point on, and I promised I would. When we walked into my boyfriend's work, he gave me a quizzical look. I thanked the bouncer again and sent him on his way. I explained what happened to the man and he laughed at me. Perhaps I deserved that, but no one warned me. I didn't take him to dinner that night and never walked that street alone again. So creeper in the creepy van, stay away from me and keep your $200 for something less creepy. My name is Thomas. I'm a 33-year-old man that lives in Baltimore City, better known as B-More or Bodymore in the urban area where it's dangerous. But when you live your whole life somewhere, you tend to adapt to your area. The following story happened 5 years ago when I was 28. I was walking to my buddy's place at about 10 p.m. to buy some green. His house was about a 15-minute walk away, and on the way back, I nipped into the store. Because I had my cousin's independence card, so I definitely was going to buy some munchies for a post-smoke snack. But on my way back, I saw a white car drive past me and pulled up a side street a block away. Mind you, I had my earphones in, but didn't have anything playing in case someone tried anything funny. When I got to the block where the car was, a guy hopped out the car and tried to catch up with me. I started to feel unnerved by his ever-growing proximity, and when he was within earshot, I heard him utter something. I then took out one of the earbuds and with an annoyed tone said, "What do you want?" He instantly shot me a fierce reply, to not speak to him that way, and it was at that moment I saw a silver firearm that he was clutching in his coat. I had a bag of junk food in my hand and a bag of green in my shoe. Without missing a beat, he said, "Where's the money?" I then realized I was being robbed. I stopped in my tracks. "I don't have any money, I've just got this bag of green." It was at that moment when someone else hopped out the car. He was armed too, and went onto the right side of me. I was now standing with two armed men at either side of me, and did the only logical thing I could think of. I took off my shoe and threw the bag of green to the ground while sputtering, "That's all I've got." With a fierce reply, he shouted at me to put my shoe back on. As I started to, I looked around. There were plenty of people watching me nearby, watching all of this go down. The guy on the left then went, "Yo, if you don't pull out $1, I'ma shoot you." My fight or flight kicked in. With no money on me at all and nothing to appease the robbers unsatisfied with their loot, I pulled my pants up a little more because I was preparing to run, and before I could say anything else, sprinted up the street. I was only 3 minutes away from my house. As I bolted, I passed people wearing crazy expressions as they'd seen the entire ordeal. When I got 2 blocks from my house, I ran through a parking lot and headed by a gate that had a lot of high bushes and trees, and caught my breath because I couldn't run anymore. But I didn't stay long because I was still scared and didn't know if I was still being chased. So I got the hell up and jogged the rest of the way to my house. Once I composed myself and made sure I wasn't followed, I sat down and told my little 8-year-old cousin just how dangerous it was at night in Baltimore City after dark. Oddly enough, I was telling him earlier that day how dangerous it was, and telling him a story of how I was robbed on another occasion. Safe to say, I no longer try and go out after dark. I was babysitting for these 2 ladies who each had a son. They wanted to go out, so I stayed at one of their houses and watched their boys. It was around 8 p.m. and the boys were sitting on the couch, playing on their iPads and whatnot, when someone knocked on the door. I asked them if anyone was supposed to come over, and both of them said no. I go over and check the eye hole in the door, and it's some guy in a grey hoodie, deliberately hunched over so I can't see his face. Immediately I'm like, "Nope," and don't say anything and start pacing around, because I don't want to give him any inclination we're inside. A few minutes later I check outside the little window through the curtains and he's gone. I didn't want to spook the kids anymore, and there weren't any more knocks, so I just left it as kind of a prank. Cut to a few hours later and the mums get back. They ask me how everything was and I say the kids were great, but someone had knocked on the door. They ask me what time and I say around 8, and one of the mums starts freaking out and going through her phone. The other tells me that right around that time someone had been making strange phone calls to them on a blocked number. They had disguised their voice and were saying things like, "I can see you through the window." They didn't think it was serious because it didn't make sense in the context of where they were. But in retrospect, they were almost positive it was me he was looking at through the window. They escorted me to the car and I touched base with them later, and apparently nothing strange ever happened after that, and the ladies have no clue who it could have been. But I'm just really glad I didn't open the door, because I have a feeling in my gut it would have been really bad. I was a 19-year-old female when this took place. It wasn't overly late, about 8 p.m, but it was winter, so it was already dark. I was walking home from visiting a friend, about 20 minutes from home. It was quiet, and I had headphones in, just listening to music, so I didn't hear this guy approach from behind me. All of a sudden, this cyclist has slammed on his brakes directly beside me and is staring at me. I take my headphones out to glance at him, but he doesn't speak, just stares. I keep walking and I'm pretty close to home now, so I wasn't too worried. This guy starts cycling again, slowly now, matching my walking speed. I keep my eyes forward and ignore him, fully aware he's still looking at me. I get to my flat. I walk down this really quiet, dark country lane, and although it wasn't very long, it wasn't an ideal place to be with this guy. So I stopped and glanced down at my phone, hoping he'd keep going. He did, for a short while, but then he turned around to watch me. There was no way I was walking down that lane with this guy there. So I crossed the street and went down another road, a well-lit one with lots of houses, hoping it would be safer. That's when he said something that chilled me to my core. "Where you going? You don't live that way. I know where you live." I wanted to be sick. He could have been bluffing, but the way he said it, I believed him. I was terrified. I dialed my parents' number and kept walking, aware of this guy following me even now. When my partner answered, I quietly asked him to come get me when I heard the guy go, "Oh, shh," and he cycled off ahead of me. I don't know what startled him so much. I guess it was because he thought I was calling the police, but he took off and I'm forever grateful he did. I was born in the 60s and didn't think I'd live to see 30 because I did drugs, drank and loved to drive fast and ride with friends that drove faster. I was a loner. Even very young, I'd walk all around our town alone. My grandma's house was 2 blocks from the fairgrounds, and as a small girl, I'd watch the show parade of fairgoers that you never seemed to see around the town the rest of the year. I was 14, the bicentennial, when the fair came to town in 1976. I waited for Grandma to go to sleep and walked to the darkened carnival. Most of the carnies I met were in their 20s and looked out for me. We smoked together, listened to their biographies, and they're all fascinating people. When we were at high school, there was a popular couple. She a doe-eyed all-American beauty, he a senior, a man, yet had some boy left on his face. Even better, they were 2 of the sweetest people I'd ever met. It was Friday, and talk among the girls all day was that he was going to give her his class ring on their date, which was a huge deal back then. It was a cold winter night when they pulled off the road and parked. He left his truck running to keep the heater on. Neither of them returned home from the date. Family and friends searched through the night. They were found in the morning, perished in each other's arms. You see, where he parked, snow packed into the tailpipe, and they asphyxiated from the fumes. Victims of the poison turned cherry red. I still can't get the picture out of my head of what they must have looked like. Rosy cheeks. Was there frost on them? I grew up where basketball was king. The 3 high schools in my town were rivals on the state level many seasons. When I was there, the varsity basketball players dated the cheerleaders. One Saturday they were hanging out, and the guys were shooting hoops. One of the team stars twisted his ankle and had to go to the ER. The boys got in one car and the girls followed in the other. The driver in the front of the car couldn't resist showing off for the girls and had a spectacular crash right in front of their girlfriends. 3 guys walked away, but the 4th lost his life. His girlfriend lost it all at the sight of the body and literally hasn't gotten over it 40 years later. Finally, my boyfriend and I decided we wanted to have sandwiches from the local pizza joint. We picked up our order and drove up to a park that also served as Lover's Lane. My boyfriend killed the headlights and rolled to a stop under a large tree. It was winter and full-on dark. As we ate, our eyes became adjusted to the dark, or lack of, and we could make out a sedan parked a couple of cars' lengths away from us. We noticed a guy slumped over on the steering wheel. We didn't think anything about it. We figured he was drunk and parked there to sleep it off. The next day over breakfast, Mom mentioned they found a body in the park. My food stuck in my throat, reading the newspaper. She said the driver hadn't felt well earlier in the day and probably had a massive heart attack as soon as he parked. I grew up in a small town where you wouldn't necessarily know everybody, but you're familiar with people in town. This story happened when I was maybe 15 to 16, so about 15 years ago. I was on my way to practice one Saturday morning when I noticed an older man on the corner ahead staring at me. Being me, I smile and wave at the guy as I pass. Back then I smiled at everyone, and then I stop at the same corner waiting to cross. The guy comes right up behind me and I vaguely remember smelling him, feel him breathe on my neck. I'm a bit worried but brush it off as being overreactionary. Light changes and I carry on, and this guy speeds up walking behind me, mumbling something to get my attention. I must have looked terrified, because a woman begins to walk next to me asking if I know the guy. I tell her that I don't, and she stays in pace with me, and has to go into the local grocery store that we're passing in front of with her. We get to the store, and the lady immediately grabs an employee at the register for help. At this point I'm shaking in fear, trying to hide behind people standing by the register. They're all discussing something. I'm not sure what, because the guy that was following me was just staring at me through the window, making a throat-slicing motion, and I'm paralyzed. The people at the store gathered around me to make me feel safe, as I'm pretty sure I broke down in tears when he did that. And soon after, the cops came, and I watched them arrest him. I don't remember much after that besides my parents picking me up from the store and going to the police station. My dad actually worked as a dispatcher in town at the time, and he told me a few days later the guy was off his meds and had been brought into a local psycho hospital for treatment. I never saw the man or the woman who saved me after that. So, to my guardian angel, I never got the chance to thank you for protecting me. I grew up in a small town, a type where people don't really lock their doors, at least they didn't used to. When I was 14, I got called to babysit for one of my regulars who had 3 daughters. For context, I'm a female. It was December, so a lot of Christmas work parties were going on. I arrived and we went over to the usual rules. She mentioned the upstairs TV was out, so once I put the girls to bed just to head down and watch TV. So after playing with the girls, I sent them off to bed and went downstairs. I spent a few hours channel surfing, and it was about 1:30 a.m. and I remember grabbing the phone, though I can't remember who I was calling, maybe my mom or sister, to let them know I would be home really late. But then I heard the door upstairs open, which sort of surprised me. The mum enjoyed the nights I babysat, as she knew I was a night owl who could be there super late, like until 3 in the morning, provided she held the cab for me, as it was a small town but I live on the other side of it. As I headed upstairs I heard someone stumble, so I picked up my pace to make sure she was okay, only to find 3 people I'd never seen before. There was a clearly drunk woman laying in the doorway and 2 guys. The guys looked as surprised as I was. I asked them why they were there, and the girl had slurred out that they were there for the party. I was confused and asked if they knew Helen, the mother. One of the guys looked up at me and down, and I began getting even more uncomfortable about the whole situation. He asked if I was here alone. I remember not wanting to answer because all I could think about was the fact that there were 3 little girls asleep in the house. I decided instead of answering him I would simply state there was no party here and that they needed to leave. The girl was adamant that she was there for the party. The guy who had asked me the question took a step forward, and I demanded this time they leave, and we all heard the sound of a phone button being pushed. I had forgotten it was even in my hand, but it seemed to be enough to startle the guy who thought I pushed it on purpose. The guy quickly told the other guy that they were leaving, and helped the woman up. As soon as they were outside, I slammed the door and locked it and quickly ran up to the front window to watch them. They continued up the block, so it wasn't merely messing up the house numbers for them. The mum returned home 2 hours later and was confused why the door was locked. She was too drunk, so I told her it was just to make me feel safe. I feel stupid for not telling someone, but they didn't do it again. To the 3 drunks one winter's night, let's not meet again. I overslept this morning and didn't end up leaving my house until 11 a.m. Side note, my family's car has been broken down for a few months, so I was walking to school. It usually takes me half an hour to walk to my school, and I had my headphones in listening to music at full volume, so I couldn't hear anything around me. So I was jamming out to my songs and I see this black ute drive past me. I didn't think anything of it since people drive down the street all the time, but it did a U-turn at the end of the street and passed me again. I thought I was being paranoid when it kept driving past me, so I tried to look through the window to see who it was, but the windows were tinted. It must have driven past me at least 7 times at this point, and I was freaking out, man. Since I live in Australia, we all have uniforms, and at my school there's a junior and senior uniform. As a senior, it's very obvious I have a stripe down the length of my shirt. I had no idea what was going on with this dude, but I was nearing the end of the street, and I was relieved when he turned off at the end of it. I turned the corner and was almost at the front gates when I saw him, parked between me and my school, as I walked as quickly as I could. And that's when I heard the door open. At this point, I sprinted into the school grounds and hid behind a bush. I hear the door slam and he peeled away from the school. I didn't tell anyone until about 5 minutes ago, when me and my mum were walking home from the shops. Apparently there's been a guy in a black ute in the area doing dodgy things. I was 18 and decided to drop out of high school to go with my girlfriend to Central America. I had been having a fantastic time, except for one incident that was a bit uncomfortable with an older gentleman. I would say in general people were nicer and kinder to us than I could have ever expected. Anyway, it was kind of the end of a long ride from a beach to Leon, and in order to be able to make it back to Granada, which is where we were going to stay that night, we were shuffled onto a bus where we really didn't know where we were going. Over the course of the bus ride, people began to filter off the bus. We didn't notice at first because it was over the course of a few stops and we were trying to rest a bit, but by the time we got into the city of Managua, there were just about 4 or 5 people on the bus, including us. The sun had gone down, the bus was driving into areas where literally every structure was half-built concrete and corrugated metal sheets, and the streets were getting narrower and narrower. We saw 3 dead dogs on the side of the road, which were being eaten by other dogs, and then we stopped looking out the windows. Eventually the bus stops, the driver quickly ushers us off the bus, and then locks the doors and drive away. We look around and it's the scene of a nightmare. I don't want to over-dramatize it, because in many ways it was the saddest and darkest part I've ever been to, but there's a lot of desperation there that I couldn't fully comprehend. It was like if you took everything terrifying a drug addict might meet in East Harlem at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday, every schizophrenic patient who's ever received treatment of any kind, and every young opportunistic criminal you've ever met, and left them to fend for a year. One woman who sticks out in my mind was standing on a pile of cinder blocks, licking a downed power line with her eyes rolled back in her head. We stood there for a good 3 minutes trying to say under our breaths to each other, "What are we going to do?" Every cab that drove by ignored traffic lights and wouldn't stop for us, and people started noticing. The true scariest moment was when people started coming out of their houses and just standing there staring directly at us. My girlfriend was on the verge of tears at this point, and finally this little old woman came running out of her house yelling at us, "What are you doing here?" in Spanish, and grabs us and pulls us into her friend's shop, shouting and shooing away the people who have crowded closest to us. She then tells us that if we have walked a block in any direction, we would have been robbed, beaten, or worse. She locked us into her shop until we could jump into a car that her friend had called that pulled up in front of the shop. Moral of the story, we nearly perished in Nicaragua. Everyone has that one set of neighbors that you love to hate. They're always partying late into the crack of dawn, throwing their trash on your side of the yard, asking to borrow things or other such acts. Not to gatekeep having bad neighbors, but I feel like the years of hell these neighbors have caused my family were way worse than most normal awful neighbors. I'll let you decide. It's hard to condense so much into a few short paragraphs, and even still, I feel like this story will be sort of long. Setting-wise, a house across from ours was up for rent, and this would become the gateway to hell that ensues. We knew the person who owned the house, so some of this would be stuff she told us afterwards. The first signs of trouble started when they moved in, driving their moving truck onto the driveway and parking a nice Lexus on the lawn. For the kind of people that would come to live there, a Lexus was definitely suspect, but parking cars on the lawn became a daily habit that killed it over time. Another red flag was the number of people that came and went as the weeks went by. No one knew the true amount of people that actually lived there, but the regulars were as follows. An overweight blonde, think Walmart shopper but uglier. A somewhat more decent brunette with glasses. She was a less frequent visitor, but we did see her often. A hideous rat-looking punk boy that couldn't have been older than 18. A teenage twig girl who looked like she was doing some devious stuff in her spare time and appeared anemic. And two small toddlers, a boy and a girl. This new addition to the neighborhood quickly claimed their spot as the loudest people in the neighborhood with seemingly endless parties and arguments that would last for hours at a time. They had the foulest mouths you could ever imagine, and even the youngest child could be heard saying words that no young person should ever be exposed to. Though the days were nice, we couldn't open our windows unless we wished to hear the vulgar music that was blasting through the open garage door as one of the teens worked on a dented shell of a car every evening. A real selling point was the small toddlers would be left outside in the front yard to fend for themselves for hours on end. These people were clearly living on welfare and other such government programs, and the most annoying thing they did, come the first full month they were there, ask us for things. The brunette lady was, more often than not, the one who showed up at our door, often with a child on her hip or one in tow behind her. The requests weren't anything weird at first. Sugar, eggs, and my mum was too nice to refuse. Then they became more strange. They asked for diapers, an electric girdle to make grilled cheese, which they did surprisingly return. And once they asked if they could charge their phone for a bit. I guess they were a bit behind on their bills and their electricity got shut off. Something like that would happen a lot more frequently in the future. The highlight of this story has yet to come. All of this pales in comparison to what happened next. It was a hot summer's day, one that makes you feel like you're moving in slow motion and can't think properly. I just happened to look outside, and to my horror, I witnessed the young teen girl dragging a screaming toddler into the house after he'd been running around outside by himself, and shut the mesh door behind her. I could still make out the figure of the girl, who began to call the child all sorts of obscenities. I quickly called my mother, who stormed outside telling her to stop or she'd call the police. The girl called her a nosy so-and-so and shut the front door. Just as my mum finished calling Child Protective Services, the blonde lady, her gangly teen son and the violent teenage girl were pounding at our door, thirsty for blood. My mother slowly drew up the blinds and eased the windows open a crack, stating that she would not open the door. The nasty woman then proceeds to yell at my mother for not staying out of other people's business and that she should just leave them alone. This went on for almost a half hour before my mum had enough. My mother calmly explained that so long as she had to witness such cruel acts and foul mouths, she wasn't going to stay out of their business, and if they didn't get off her property, she would call the police. She shut the window, closed the blinds, and they kept on their cussing. Not long after, the police were called for similar reasons by our other neighbors, and the family were given a final warning and an eviction date. They stayed weeks after the water and power had been cut. When they realized they had to move out or be arrested, they did everything in their power to destroy and deface the house they were staying in. The landlady was in tears, and she gave my mother a tour of the now vacant house. Windows had been smashed, sinks were ripped out and tossed into the yard, walls were riddled with holes and foul graffiti. Toilets were blocked with human waste, and whatever they couldn't take was destroyed. It's been some time, and that same house has now been filled with a new family, but the memory is still fresh. Horrible neighbors, I hope to never meet you again. My wife and I were out for the night. We've had the same babysitter taking care of our twin boys for a while now. One of the boys was having issues falling asleep, teething in night terrors. Around 9 p.m. we got a text from her, and my wife and I were super creeped out. We drove home quickly, and I checked the house and I didn't find anything, but the babysitter was eager to leave. I've never seen a person's face more pale since that day. Here's the babysitter's text from that night. Hey, so I just had something really weird happen. No problems or anything, just strange. When I turned on the baby monitor, link was up. So I was pretty much playing a game of back and forth of picking him up and rocking him and putting him back to bed. Finally, after I put him back in bed for the third time, I didn't hear anything for about 5 minutes. I looked into the baby monitor, and there was a person or something bending over the crib. It looked like me bending over the crib, so I assumed the baby monitor glitched from when I was tucking him in. Then I realized I was not wearing a blue shirt or black pants. I took a picture of the screen as well, and there seemed to be a cloudiness to the video as the sound cut out. If you look at it, it almost looks like somebody's in the crib with him, cradling him, almost calming him. I thought it was one of you guys that had come home early and heard him crying, so you went to comfort him yourself. But when I went upstairs, there was no one there. I honestly didn't know what to make of that. This happened when I was 15, and my younger sister was 13, over 3 years ago. I always loved going trick-or-treating, because free candy, but I always hated being scared because I'm a total chicken. I don't mind someone jumping out from behind a car as I pass yelling boo. I can laugh about that afterwards, but I cannot handle anything further than that. Many parents will often tell their children that they can't go trick-or-treating after a certain age. But my parents weren't like that. They didn't care if we went and got ourselves some free candy as teens. They just stopped going with us. On this particular night, my sister and I were going down a street in our neighborhood that we'd never actually been down before, and all seemed well. Time was running out. Our feet ached from all the walking, and our plastic grocery bags were getting heavy. A number of houses were turning their lights out at that point, but there were still several left, and still a fair amount of people walking the street. As we neared the house, a dude wearing a pretty creepy costume jumped out from behind a car and scared us, then ran off to scare others in the same way. I didn't appreciate the scare, but knew he was just having his fun, so we went on, and didn't think much of him. A few houses down the line, the guy who answered the door tells us that they've got no more candy, and the car guy is on us. I wasn't even aware the dude was anywhere near us. The car guy chases us away from the house, but then continues to follow us and starts asking us questions. This dude is clearly over 20, and we're barely 15 and 13. He's asking for our names and we don't respond. He then asks if we can join him, to which we tell him no, and to go away. I don't remember exactly how it all went down, but he just wouldn't leave us alone. and his questions were starting to creep me out more and more. I kept telling myself that the guy was just trying to creep us out because it's Halloween and a lot of people find that fun. But I wasn't having fun at all, and I started feeling kind of unsafe, so I grabbed my sister's hand and we booked it to the next house that still had its lights on. Fortunately, the guy stopped following us after that. At that point, I was feeling pretty dumb with the whole experience. My feet ached, we had a good haul, and the lights were going out. There were starting to be less and less people on the street, and I was a bit shaken up. So I messaged my dad to go collect us at the stop sign where he dropped us off earlier, and we started making our way. About halfway to the stop sign, a small group of guys who might have been around 16 to 18 approached, complimented our costumes, and asked if we wanted a ride home. I quickly turned them down, already on edge from the car guy, and our dad was picking us up, which I told them. They asked if we were sure, and I'd barely began to respond when I saw our dad's car and quickly said, "Yeah, no thanks, there's our ride." Perhaps I was just really paranoid and the car guy was still messing with us, and those guys just generally wanted to help. But I don't think a little paranoia is a bad thing, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm suspicious of strangers. One thing is for sure though, I realized the downside of being a teen on Halloween night. People don't mind scaring the hell out of you, and your parents won't be there to keep you safe if you do encounter someone with ill intent. That was the day I decided I was done with trick-or-treating. I once saw a guy light himself and then jump off an 8-story building. The aftermath is something that I would much rather forget. As you can imagine, it's quite horrifying. When I saw something pinkish roll towards me, I assumed it was a stray basketball. But as you can imagine, it was something else entirely. Like I said before, this is an event I would rather forget, and it was one of the most disturbing things in my life. To this day, I now stay away from fire and am supremely afraid of heights. Before I begin, I should state this was a few years ago. I'm a tiny woman. I, at the time, looked like a teenager, and I've always been mindful that I am an easier target. I had seen a job interview for a small business looking for a secretary. No experience needed, as they would provide on-the-job training, and that was kind of a thing I was looking for. I applied. I heard back quickly and was invited to an interview. When I arrived, I was excited. It was a bit of a journey from my home, but it was in a beautiful old building on the 3rd floor with a modern layout inside, though you could tell it was very new, as it was bare bones and very little had been unpacked. Still though, if you have to work somewhere, might as well be a nice building, right? The interview seemed lovely. I only encountered female members of staff and they were all warm and lovely. The woman interviewing me was amazing and even sat talking to me for a while after, just getting to know me. When I got home, I wasn't in the door long before I got a phone call from them. I nailed the interview. Awesome. I thought I was offered the job. I was about to accept when I was told on the phone, "Okay, you'll come here tomorrow and we'll have a van drive you to where you're going to be working." I was confused. What did they mean? They then told me I'd be meeting with customers on their behalf and talking and selling stuff. I was not comfortable with this, as this wasn't what I was interviewed for, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they had a second position they thought I would fit in better with. I thought it wouldn't be that weird, as a new company, and while not that I was comfortable with it, I should at least hear them out. So I ask more questions and the woman on the other end of the line is getting more snippy and tense. The friendliness now gone, and she wouldn't reveal who I would be going with or where. By this point, so many red flags had popped up. I said no thanks and respectfully declined the offer. For anyone curious about what happened after, I reported this as it seemed very dodgy, but when they were checked in on the floor, it was no longer occupied. They'd apparently just rented it for a week. and were gone. A couple of years ago, I babysat for a family friend. She and her husband lived with their 2 kids, a girl of about 7, Kay, and a boy about 12 called Jay. I babysat these kids so much that we became very close, brother and sister type deal. They weren't difficult kids. They had a hard home life because their parents were borderline abusive, but they were still good. I tried my best to be a positive adult, as I was around 19 during this time. The family moved around a lot. I've known them for over 6 years, and they've moved nearly every year. This happened in 2015. I was halfway through my senior year when the family moved into the house. It was nice, just built in 2013 or something. A nice neighborhood, but rent was really low. The mother often bragged about the steal that she got from the house. To put it into perspective, the average rent in this area is about $1,200 for an apartment. These guys got a whole 2-story house, 3 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, freshly built in a nice neighborhood for $650. I thought that was weird and asked if there was anything wrong with the house, to which she replied the inspection came back clear, and I didn't think much beyond that. I started babysitting, and I immediately felt something was off. I have anxiety, so going to new places really puts me in a funk, so I just figured that it was that at first. The way the home is set out is important. On the bottom floor they had a living room, dining area and a kitchen with some other rooms. I spent most of my time in the living room working on things for school while the kids were upstairs playing games or with their friends. While you're in the living room, there's a wall that blocks you from seeing the stairs. Upstairs there are bedrooms. Immediately off the stairs, above the living room is the parents' room, which was off limits to the kids. Then a loft area that looks down over the front door to make a grand foyer feeling. There's a light that can be on, which can be seen from the downstairs because of the loft. Then the kids' bedrooms were down the hallway. Now let's get into the experiences. Nothing happened really at first that was too mind-boggling. Little noises here and there, knocks on the walls, things being misplaced, lights flickering, but nothing that really made me think ghosts. I figured they got what they paid for, and my memory was garbage. After a few months of that, things started picking up. The kids, who were usually very sweet and kind to each other, started becoming noticeably more snappy to everyone, especially Jay. He had complained about nightmares he started having, about someone standing in his doorway watching him. His parents wouldn't listen though. Their behavior grew even worse as time went on. It was a weekend, and the parents were going to be gone for a while. The kids were upstairs doing their thing, and I was downstairs in the living room looking at pizza to order for lunch. Out of nowhere I hear a really loud footstep coming from above me in the parents' bedroom, thunderous even. Thinking it was the kids being little dingus meats, I immediately headed upstairs to tell them to get out, but I was greeted with the 2 kids standing in the doorway, staring at the closed door to their parents' bedroom, the footsteps and bangs still continuing inside. At this point, I thought it was an intruder and instructed the kids to get in their rooms and lock the door. I called 911 and explained the situation. As I stayed on the phone, the footsteps continued to walk around the room. I could hear it move to different locations of the room. 2 officers arrived, so I grabbed the kids and we waited outside. The banging still continued as one of the officers escorted us out. They came out empty-handed and said nothing was there, and that it may have been something with the door because the banging stopped as soon as they'd opened it. I had felt the shaking of the floor move around the room, so I knew it wasn't the door. But I guess in my denial, I ignored it and took the kids out for ice cream, trying not to think about it. Another time, the kids and I were sitting in the dining area eating dinner. It was only us 3 in the house, and from the dining area you could see the light upstairs was on, and it cast a shadow onto the front door. I was making a joke about how I'm the only one who knows how to turn a light off around here, and saw a shadow of a hand from upstairs on the front door, and I think that's when it really got to me that the house was haunted. The kids didn't see it, and I didn't tell them. I figured it would just add stress that they didn't need. I told the parents that night when they came home, but they brushed me off, saying that they haven't experienced anything. This continued on for a while. I would experience something, the kids would, but the parents wouldn't believe any of us. It was summer, just after I graduated high school. I remember it vividly, because I was awake reading articles about a huge shooting that happened in my town. That's when the banging from upstairs started again. I was used to it at this point, but what I was not used to was the banging footsteps coming down the stairs. These steps were methodical and menacing. I felt terrible energy in the room, and it was cold despite it being the middle of the summer in the south. I counted the seconds between the steps. It was 5. Every single time. I called out to the kids and told them to stop joking around, but I knew it wasn't the kids, and I was terrified. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, and I couldn't see who was there. Then I saw an apparition. It was of a little girl. She had brunette hair and a red dress, and looked innocent enough, but the energy in the room was so heavy I almost threw up. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and she didn't move. I figured I was hallucinating, so I began rubbing my eyes, but when I finished rubbing them, she was right in front of me. In that situation, I couldn't move or do anything. My mind just went to kid brain, and I hid under the blanket. I called the parents, crying, and told them to come back immediately. When they came, the energy in the room lightened, and I finally came out from under the blanket, and she was gone. They asked me what was wrong and what happened, and I told them that it didn't matter because they wouldn't believe me. I then informed them to find another babysitter because I would not be returning. I still wonder about those kids. I hope they ended up okay. They moved out of that house at the end of the year, but I'm not sure if what I saw was attached to them or not. I'm still not sure what I saw. This is something that happened several years ago. I was 5 or 6. I used to go for lots of walks around my area. My neighborhood is literally against the back of a small shopping plaza. It has a grocery store, a PetSmart, an outlet, and a couple of food options all in that lot. I was trying to get into better shape, so I would walk about every other day and reward myself with a small meal and walk back home. I remember having a couple of creepy and weird things, like a dude pulled up in his truck once and was like, "Hey, I think I know you. You look familiar. Do you want to ride?" No thanks, buddy. Anyway, one day I had walked down the street a couple of blocks because a friend was supposed to meet me at Subway, and we were going to hang out for a bit. But he got caught up in family drama and never showed. So I grabbed a coffee from a nearby place and started walking home. As I got to the shopping plaza right next to my neighborhood and was walking by the parking lot for the grocery store, I heard a guy calling out. I glanced over and there was a dude who looked like he was just putting groceries into his car, waving frantically and calling to me. I ignored him at first because I didn't recognize him and just assumed it wasn't me whose attention he was trying to get. However, as I continued walking, he seemed to keep trying to get my attention, so I kind of gingerly waved back and continued on my way. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him get into his car and I thought that was the end of it, until he started driving along the parking lot at my pace. His window rolled down as he attempted to wave me over. I tried to ignore him and just walked faster towards home. When I got to where the sidewalk opened up, so people could exit the lot out onto the street, he pulled his car up in front of me, blocking my way. There were a million things racing through my mind at that moment, as he rolled the passenger window down and grabbed onto my arm and smiled at me and said, "Oh, I just wanted to tell you you are so beautiful, and you have lovely hair. I just wanted to tell you how beautiful you were when I saw you walking." I thanked him nervously and he let me go, rolled up his window and drove off. I know this one's pretty harmless, but I was so terrified. I think I was 22 to 23 then, and to add on, I am by no means the standard of attractiveness. I've always been decently overweight and kind of had acne and skin issues, so it really caught me off guard. He very much made me feel unsafe, and I hope to not meet him again. To many people, they might not appreciate just how creepy this encounter might be, but if it were to happen to you unprovoked, who knows, you'd probably feel like how I felt. When I was in grade 11, and I had just moved to a new town, I quickly became attracted to this one girl, and I would have given up my left nut for a date. We got paired up to be partners in our food and fabrics class, and I totally pulled out all the stops. I was doing whatever it took to get a date with this girl. In the class, there were a couple of projects where you'd have to sew a pillowcase or a pair of pajamas. My family didn't have a sewing machine, so we would do the project at her house. Upon the visits, I began to question how badly I wanted this girl. She lived in what appeared to be a wood cabin, and her father seemed legitimately insane. The walls were lined with animal skulls. The guy was a hardcore hunter. He had bearskin rugs and antlers all over the place. He would always walk around with his shirt off, drinking a Budweiser, chewing tobacco, and carrying a firearm, and never spoke a word to me. By this time, I was starting to gain some friendship in the school, and one of the guys I met, Neil, noticed I had taken a liking to her. He then asked me if I had heard about her parents. He proceeded to tell me that her dad ended the life of her mother and got away with it. Her body was found in the middle of the town, pumped with a couple of rounds from a shotgun. He got off on the charges from lack of proof, and she had to live with him because he was her last living relative. At this point I was like, what? The story made no sense and I wasn't about to believe it, but it definitely rattled me. But there was no way I was going to bring it up with her. A little time passes and I ask around. I go to her place to grab her and she's gorgeous. Her dad makes a comment about, you know what'll happen to you if you touch her. And suddenly the story is the only thing I can think about. We went skating, then to a movie, but I was terrified the whole time. I just couldn't get the thought out of my head that her dad was going to end my life when I got back to her place. So after a subpar date, I started the long drive back to her house. We get to the end of her driveway, which is long as she had an acreage, and she gets to the park and turns off the lights. She wants a kiss. At this point, forget her dad, I lean over and kiss her. We stop, I turn the lights back on, and there's blood in the snow and at the end of the driveway. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to sound like a coward. Her dad was a hunter, right? I'm sure there's a logical explanation. I put the car in drive and start winding down the driveway. The trail of blood seems to be getting thicker, and I'm more freaked out. She still says nothing as she's fixing her hair in the mirror. I keep driving, more blood. I turn the last corner of her driveway and see my headlight shift from the trees to her father, standing in the middle of the driveway, covered in blood all around him, huge weapon in hand, and what appeared to be a naked human body lying at his feet. I'm hyperventilating. Suddenly I'm crying and I don't know why, and I piss my pants. Her dad takes me to the hospital. Turns out I have had mild asthma for my entire life and had a panic attack. The dad found a bear at the end of the driveway, shot it, dragged it down the driveway and skinned it, or at least the part that I saw, before we got back. That was a little over 3 years ago, and I'm still with the girl. Her dad calls me a coward all the time, except we've gone on hunting trips together, and I'm pretty sure he's a fan. Neil was a jealous ex. Her parents split up, and her mum is actually pretty awesome too. This story took place when I was around 4 or 5. I was born and raised in an extremely close and big family. We all lived within about a mile from each other, around a large peak in a small Texas town. Unrelated fun fact for those horror fans out there, this peak is the present-day location of the majority of the town of the dreaded sundown murders. My family was jam-packed full of aunts, uncles, and I'd say I saw them at least once a week for my entire childhood. I can't stress enough how close we all were growing up, and how trusting they all were, as it plays an important part on the story. So this story came up recently between my older brother, my mother and I, because I opened up about a series of nightmares I'd been having that have basically plagued me for as long as I can remember. These nightmares are always very similar, and basically always consist of me as a small child in my childhood home, attempting to escape my home while something horrible chases after me. The something is never actually visually seen, but is more like this massive, looming person reaching out to me from the dark, and it always catches me before I can get outside. This usually results in me waking up in sweat. These dreams always seem to center around these very vague, yet oddly detailed memories of a babysitter I once had. Here's where it gets odd. These memories I have are almost like dreams. I very specifically remember the details of what was happening and the feelings I had during these events. But everything else was just out of reach. That goes for the babysitter herself as well. I remember it was a female who was middle-aged, but can't for the life of me recall her face. In my memories, it looks like I never got a good look at her. The two specific incidences I remember were not happy ones. The first memory I have is that when I would get in trouble, what for I have no memory of, I would be forced to sit outside on the back porch in shorts and a t-shirt during winter. I remember because I would shiver and just sit there quietly, scared, and complaining would only cause the babysitter to give me more problems. The second memory was even worse to me. The babysitter loved to play this game she made up. She would turn off all the lights in the house and go hide deep in one of the back rooms. I was left in the front room and was told that if I wanted food or to watch TV, I had to find her first. I never had any idea where she was hiding, and if I ever found her, she would jump out screaming like a madwoman and chase me. I remember her laughter and my fear. I often remember being frozen with terror that I would sit on the ground near the front door too scared to find her. No matter how long I waited, she would never come out of hiding, regardless of how hungry I got. I specifically remember this one time very well. I was so little and scared. I was whimpering as I slowly built up bravery to walk to the back hall looking for her. My hunger felt deadly at this point, and I needed to find her. I checked bathrooms, bedroom, and closets, and nothing. She was nowhere. I remember standing in my parents' bedroom trying to figure out where she could be when I saw her. She was a dark shape under the big bed peeking at me from under the bedskirt. We stared at each other unmoving. I couldn't make out her face, but I knew she was smiling at me. She was like a crazy feral animal under there. I remember her sliding herself along the floor so fast, screaming and turning to run as she made it to her feet. And then the memory goes dark. I don't know what happened after that, and that scares me just as much as the memory I do have of the event. I never shared these memories because they seemed so distant I often wondered if they were even real. One day when I was in my 20s, I mentioned the nightmares to my mother and brother while we were sitting around talking one of the weeks when my brother and I were home from college. We would often do this to tell funny stories and remember all the kids we knew from long before. Then I decided to ask my mum about the babysitter. She seemed confused and told me she'd never hired a babysitter for either I or my brother, because of how big and close my family was, and how protective my mum was of us. She never trusted anyone but family to watch us. My aunts and grandmother were the absolute opposite of the woman. Loving, kind, fun, and treated me like their own children. I couldn't imagine them doing these things to me. My mum seemed genuinely confused but also slightly worried, like a mother would be while hearing such a horrible story. She told me she truly couldn't even begin to imagine who I was talking about. With her certainty, and with the memories being so vague in important places, I decided I must have imagined it. Then my brother brought it up again the next day when we were driving together. "Yeah, I remember that," he said with some concern in his voice. "Like I remember seeing you getting taken outside and being forced to sit there, and I thought it was horrible. I don't know why we never told anyone." He too had no memory of who the woman was, but he remembers feeling defenseless over the whole thing. He only had vague memories of the horrible games she would play, but pointed out how he absolutely had no memory of her ever targeting him with her torment. He remembers the events as if he were an audience member. He did, however, remember things I didn't. That included that I would often get into trouble because I would use my imagination to tell stories, and the babysitter would often get mad and she realized it wasn't true. This resulted in me being kicked out of the house. I just wanted to point out to my brother that he was only 1 year older, so he too was very little. I have thought about bringing it back up with my mum, but I honestly trust her that she has no idea who I'm talking about, and I don't want to make her feel horrible about something that happened so long ago. I just wish I could understand what the hell happened and who the hell she was. My brother never brought it up again after that, but told me at the time he had always played off the memory as being young and misunderstanding whatever happens. I'm a 19-year-old female, and I went to a Greek island last May with my 22-year-old cousin, also female, as part of a trip. We liked to go on aimless walks out of the town that we stayed in to see what was around. On our way back from one of these walks, we were on a long, narrow road that dropped off on each side to beaches. Beautiful. A small green car passed by us in the same direction that we were walking and stopped 50 to 100 yards in front of us, just sitting on the road. We say maybe they're just taking in the view. We continue to walk, and when we finally get to the car, the passenger window is down, which happens to be our side, and the man is staring at us through the mirror. As soon as we pass, the car pulls forward past us again. Immediately after the green car drives past us once more, a large truck drives past, again in the same direction, and pulls alongside the green car. They both stop for a moment and are clearly talking to each other. The green car speeds off and the black truck drives forward a bit more and stops on the same side of the road again. Keep in mind we're on a narrow road. We can't turn around because town is the other way. Behind us is just beaches and a few houses. The black truck is stopped on our side of the road, and as we get closer the driver opens the front and back door of the cab, but does nothing else. Just stands there outside the truck mostly, looking back towards us. We decide this is way too sketchy. Both cars were clearly keeping an eye on us and watching and communicating. When we get closer to the truck, we nope off the road and drop to the beach. We get as far away from the road as the beach will allow us and start speed walking. The man from the truck crosses the road and watches us with binoculars from the side of the beach. We ran until we caught up with another couple and followed them back to town. I then saw the same green car driving back past us multiple times as we ran parallel to the road down the beach. We made it to our hotel safely, locked up, and tied up our doors to the balcony and hallway. In a nutshell, I suppose I nearly experienced an aspect of the Taken movie for myself. But keep in mind, I would absolutely still recommend going to Greece, and this is an extremely unlikely and isolated incident. It's a beautiful place with so many wonderful islands to explore and some very sweet and lovely locals, by far the nicest people I've ever met. I've solo traveled a bit, and the world is actually not as scary as some make it out to be. The person who just broke the world record for youngest person to visit every country is a 21-year-old woman, and she'll tell you the same thing. Anything can happen anywhere. Do your research, learn a bit of self-defense, and always be aware of your surroundings. But always be open to new places too. During my life, I've had a number of strange experiences happen to me. The first, I was in bed sleeping, when I had a dream that I woke up in my bed. It's a loft bed about 6'5" feet up, and I saw a very tall figure of a man standing at the foot of my bed. He had long, sharp fingers and an arm that reached close to his knees. He was about 12 feet in height and had to hunch over his head or it would hit the ceiling, and he scared the hell out of me. He reached for my leg and grabbed it with his sharp fingers and tried to pull me from the bed, but I held onto the rails of the bed and he was too weak to pull me free. His claw-like fingers raked down my calf as I woke up. Immediately I sat up and realized my leg had a long scratch going down from just below the knee to my ankle, and it was bleeding. The second is my old house had a staircase with a window at foot level that overlooked the driveway. As I walked up the stairs, I'd sometimes see a large, bulky black dog looking at me, sitting from the outside window from the corner of my eye. It had glowing yellow-orange eyes, but would be gone if I looked directly at it. I also saw it in the laundry room of the house, but it again vanished when I looked directly at it. I saw it 7 or 8 different times, all by the stairs except for one time in the laundry room. I never told a soul, but this year 2 of my brothers told me that they had seen the dog by the stairs as well. We had 3 dogs at that house who had free reign of the property, but none of them looked remotely like the beast we saw. I'm confident it was not a real dog, because the real dogs who lived there chased any and every animal away religiously. If it's relevant, both the laundry room and the stairs were added to the house after my family moved in. The third occasion. After staying a night at my friend's house, I woke up to see a silver orb about the size of a softball rolling around on the ceiling. It rolled a bit, then rolled right into the ceiling, and I never saw it again. I later read about something called the Bird's Mystery Sphere, which resembles what I saw, but was larger than the one I saw. My next event happened when I was 19. This one starts with a very special and occasional phenomenon that happens while I was in college. While laying down for bed, I feel the presence of someone laying behind me or above me. When I slept on my back or side, following the weird feeling, I'd hear a woman or young girl's voice whisper something in my ear. It was typically either my name or something along the lines of, "Don't sleep, wake up, stay here." Then I'd get this feeling like a gentle touch or something cold touch my back that would make me jump. After time passed, the incidents increased in frequency. After a semester at school, which I didn't like, I took a semester off and moved back home. During my time, this would happen every other week or so, and the "wake up, don't sleep" message did not change. But things really picked up when I went to a different school the following semester. I've had these whispers in my ear and the weird feeling of someone behind me almost nightly. After about 2 weeks of this, the voice changed from a woman or girl to an old man. He spoke a language I didn't understand and was intensely creepy. I also got a very strong feeling of evil when it happened. He never spoke to me in more than 2 or 3 words. Then I began to get sleep paralysis when I slept on my back, which I did to avoid the creepy voice. My 2 sleep paralysis episodes featured a large demonic creature breathing heavily and running towards my bed, and the sound of hurt animals as well. At this point I was too freaked out and consulted Reddit and was advised to try and tell the voices to go away. That same night I felt the presence behind me and told it loudly to go away before it spoke. It did not speak, but the room felt lighter, so I settled back in and felt the presence again a few minutes after, followed by a very intense sensation similar to an ice cube being pressed against my back. I told it to go away again, and the ice cube sensation then happened 3 times in rapid succession, so I sat up loudly and told it to piss off, and the presence seemed to disappear. As I laid back down to try to sleep, I felt the bed tilt towards the wall, and felt as though I was going to be dumped onto the floor head first. I bolt upright, and the bed is still lying flat. I look towards the center of the room, and see a very large purple disc with some green on it, floating from near the door towards the sliding glass door to the balcony of the apartment. It was hard to describe, shaped like a rounded disc about 4 feet thick, and about 6 to 7 feet in diameter. It wasn't glowing. It almost looked like it was made of colored shadow, but it was not transparent, and floated towards the balcony, straight through the glass door. I was in awe but not afraid. After it left, the room felt lighter and safer. I have not had a single strange experience since then, and this happened in late September of 2018.